What if the beginning of human history is not really the beginning, but only the first page that happened to survive the fire? You can imagine the thought resting quietly in the back of your mind as you stand before a glass case in a museum, looking down at a small clay tablet no larger than a human hand. It is cracked. Its edges are broken. Its surface is crowded with wedge-shaped marks pressed into damp clay thousands of years ago by someone whose name is gone. Archaeologists have lifted such tablets from the ruins of ancient Mesopotamia, from cities buried beneath dust, from temple archives, from royal libraries, from places where scribes once sat cross-legged in the heat and shaped memory into signs. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as the room grows quieter around you, tell me where you are listening from and what time it is there, because somewhere on the earth, while you are hearing this, night is already leaning over the rooftops. The tablet in front of you does not glow. It does not announce itself. It does not look like something that could disturb the timeline of the world. It looks humble, almost mute, a small brown object hardened by age. Yet within such tablets, the ancient Sumerians recorded gods, kings, floods, cities, rituals, debts, harvests, offerings, dreams, and the careful machinery of human life. They wrote lists of grain and sheep. They wrote hymns to temples. They wrote laments for ruined cities. They wrote myths in which beings from the high heavens shaped destiny, argued over creation, and watched humanity with a gaze that was sometimes protective, sometimes cold, and sometimes impossible to understand. You're not asked to believe every story as literal history. That would be too easy, and perhaps too loud for this quiet hour. The record is fragmentary. Scholars debate dates, meanings, translations, and literary layers. Many Sumerian compositions survive only in later copies, sometimes written centuries after the ideas they preserve first moved through human memory. A broken line can change the shape of a story. A missing sign can become a door into uncertainty. One scholar may read a passage as theology, another as royal propaganda, another as inherited myth, and another as the echo of something older than the city that preserved it. Still, the question remains, why do some of the earliest written stories sound as if they're remembering a world already ancient? You step away from the museum glass, not physically, but inwardly, letting the modern room dissolve. The polished floor fades, the hum of climate control becomes wind, the white light becomes sun. Around you, the air thickens with heat, dust, and the faint wet smell of river mud. You're standing in southern Mesopotamia, in the land the Greeks would much later call between the rivers, where the Tigris and Euphrates carried silt, life, danger, and memory through flat country toward the Persian Gulf. The horizon is low and wide. Reeds whisper in the marshes. Waterbirds rise suddenly from the shallows. The ground beneath your sandals is dry in one place and slick in another, because civilization here does not begin with marble or mountain stone. It begins with clay. Clay for walls, clay for tablets, clay for seals, clay for bricks dried beneath an unforgiving sun. The same earth that built the city also preserved its thoughts. Somewhere ahead, smoke rises from cooking fires. Donkeys move slowly through a lane. Workers carry baskets. A priestly figure steps through the courtyard of a temple precinct, the hem of his garment brushing against dust. Above the clustered roofs, a raised platform catches the light. It is not yet the towering ziggurat of later imagination, perhaps not in the form people picture today, but the sacred idea is already there. Height, separation, ascent, a place where the human settlement reaches upward, toward powers that are felt more than seen. The Sumerians are often credited with developing one of the world's earliest known writing systems, cuneiform, which began in practical administration before expanding into literature, law, ritual, and myth. That mainstream historical detail matters because it reminds you that the first written mysteries were not written by dreamers alone. They were written by people who counted barley, managed labour, recorded temple goods, and organised city life with astonishing discipline. The strange stories do not float outside civilization. They're embedded in it. This is what makes them so quietly unsettling. The same culture that could record sheep deliveries and field boundaries also told stories of divine assemblies, creation by design, ancient sages, sacred kingship, and flood destruction. In one room, a scribe might copy a list of rations. In another, he might preserve a tradition that kingship came down from heaven. Both were written in the same wedge-shaped script, on the same kind of clay, by the same human hands. You may picture the scribe now, bent over his tablet while the afternoon light dims. He does not think of himself as ancient. He does not know that thousands of years later, people will call his world the beginning of history. To him, the past already stretches behind him like a long shadow. His teachers have teachers. His city has older shrines beneath newer bricks. His gods have stories that begin before his own city walls. When he writes, he is not inventing from emptiness. He is receiving, arranging, copying, preserving. And yet, preserving what? Perhaps only sacred tradition. Perhaps poetic memory. Perhaps the political language of temples and kings. Perhaps an attempt to explain why humans toil, why rivers flood, why rulers claim authority, why death waits even for the powerful. It may be that the ancient mind placed cosmic meaning around ordinary suffering because the world was too harsh to bear without a story. But some have wondered whether these texts also contain something more unusual, a memory of a lost age, not in the sense of a proven vanished super-civilization, but as a deep cultural impression that earlier orders of life once existed and then disappeared. The idea is fragile. It cannot be held like a pot or dated like a brick. It belongs to the dim space between myth and memory. Yet Sumerian traditions often speak as though human society inherited a structure from powers that came before ordinary kings. There is one curious thread that continues to draw attention. In later Mesopotamian tradition, certain sages known as Apkallu were said to have brought arts, wisdom, and civilizing knowledge before the flood. Some were associated with the world before Catastrophe, with knowledge that later generations treated as ancient and dangerous. Mainstream scholars often read these figures as mythic culture heroes, priestly ideals, or symbolic ancestors of wisdom. More speculative readers have imagined them as distorted memories of teachers from an earlier world. Neither reading can be fully sealed. The tablets do not offer that comfort. You walk deeper into the imagined city. The sun lowers. Clay walls turn amber. Somewhere, a reed stylus presses into a tablet while it is still soft, each mark a small act of resistance against forgetting. A child passes carrying water. A dog sleeps in the shade. At the temple gate, incense begins to burn, mixing sweetness with the smell of bitumen, wool, sweat, and dust. Nothing here feels like a beginning. It feels like a continuation. That is the first quiet contradiction. When you look at Sumer, you're told you're looking at one of civilization's earliest written horizons. Yet the stories written there often glance backward, toward an age no longer reachable, a time before the first cities we can securely name, before the familiar dynasties, before the world settled into the shape archaeology can map with confidence. The tablets do not say, clearly and simply, that the Anunnaki left a final message. They do not hand you a sealed letter from heaven. They do something more elusive. They preserve patterns. They preserve a world in which divine beings organize existence. They preserve a memory of creation as labor and obligation. They preserve flood, kingship, descent, rebellion, service, silence, and withdrawal. They preserve the feeling that humanity's place was assigned, questioned, and perhaps warned over. The Anunnaki themselves are not simple figures. In Mesopotamian texts, The term can refer to a group of deities, often associated with high divine authority, the underworld, fate, or the great powers who stand behind the visible order. Their role shifts across time and text. That uncertainty is important. It keeps the story from becoming too neat. The ancient record is not a modern novel with one clean plot. It is a broken field of voices, copied and recopied, translated through centuries of changing belief. Still, as night gathers over the clay city, you may feel the first outline of the mystery. What if the so-called final message was never a single sentence? What if it was a warning hidden inside the structure of the stories themselves? Not a command carved in perfect stone, but a pattern left across myths, rituals, king lists, laments, and fragments. A message about power, about memory, about what happens when beings create servants and then fear what those servants may become, about the danger of forgetting the terms under which a civilization was born. Perhaps that is why the tablets feel so strangely alive. They do not merely tell you what people believed, they ask you what has been lost between belief and history. They invite you to listen not only to the words that survived, but to the silence around them. The last light falls across the city, the river darkens, the reeds move like whispers. In a room of packed earth, a tablet is set aside to dry, its surface carrying marks that no one in that moment thinks of as mysterious. It is simply a record, a lesson, a sacred story, a duty fulfilled before sleep. But thousands of years later, you are still leaning toward it. You're still wondering whether the oldest clay was not trying to explain where humanity began, but trying to remind humanity of something it had already forgotten. The first thing you notice is the dust. It does not rise in a dramatic storm. It simply hangs there, soft and pale, moving through the afternoon light as if the city itself is breathing. It settles on your hands, your lips, the edge of your garment. It gathers in the cracks between sun-dried bricks. It coats the reeds tied into bundles near the water. It softens every colour until the world becomes clay, straw, smoke, and gold. You're walking now through the land of the first southern cities, where the earth is flat enough that the sky feels enormous. There are no mountains to guard the horizon, no forest to hide the distance, only river, marsh, plain, settlement, and the long exposure of human life beneath the sun. The Tigris and Euphrates do not merely decorate this world, they decide it. Their floods bring fertility and danger. Their channels shift. Their waters must be guided, argued with, measured, feared, and thanked. This is one of the quiet foundations of ancient Mesopotamian civilization, irrigation. Fields did not simply feed themselves. People dug canals, maintained levees, organized labor, and built a society around the management of water. In that sense, Sumerian life was never separate from order. Survival required coordination. Grain required planning. Cities required storage. Temples required offerings. Kings required legitimacy. The world had to be arranged again and again, or it would return to mud, reeds, hunger, and silence. You pass a canal where the water shines brown and slow. A boy stands knee-deep near the bank, pushing a reed basket toward the shallows. A woman bends over jars, rinsing them with steady hands. Somewhere farther in, men repair a wall with bricks still warm from the sun. The smell is layered and human, wet clay, animal dung, cut reeds, sweat, fish, smoke, date syrup, and the faint sharpness of bitumen used to seal baskets and boats. Nothing here feels primitive, it feels difficult. That difference matters. Modern imagination often looks backward and sees ancient people as simple, because their tools were simple. But as you move through this city, you feel the opposite. Every small task belongs to a larger system. A jar has a maker, a seal, a storehouse, a ration, a temple official, a household need. A brick carries the memory of hands that shaped it. A field exists because canals were opened, dredged, defended, and recorded. A name scratched into clay may settle a debt, prove a delivery, or fix a person in the machinery of the city. The city is alive with counting, and yet, beneath the counting, another rhythm continues. Near the temple precinct, people lower their voices, the air changes, smoke from offerings moves upward in thin columns. The smell of incense mingles with grain and animal fat. You can hear the soft slap of bare feet on packed earth. A courtyard opens, and beyond it, a raised sacred building catches the sun. It is not a palace of fantasy. It is mud brick, practical and holy at once. The temple is an economic centre, a ritual centre, and a symbolic point where the human community faces the divine order it believes stands above it. In Sumerian city-states, each major city was closely associated with a patron deity. Uruk with Inanna, Nippur with Enlil, Eridu with Enki, Ur with Nanna. These associations changed in emphasis over time, but the pattern is important. Cities were not just settlements. They were earthly houses of cosmic powers. To live in a city was, in some sense, to live inside a relationship with a god. This is where the mystery begins to thicken. If a city belongs to a god, then human work becomes more than work. Digging canals becomes service. Storing grain becomes service. Raising walls becomes service. Copying tablets becomes service. The daily life of the city is folded into a sacred structure, and that structure may be read as theology, politics, social organization, or all of them at once. You can imagine a temple worker carrying a basket of barley through a shaded passage. He's tired, his shoulder aches, dust sticks to his skin. He may not be thinking about cosmic meaning. He may be thinking about the weight of the basket, the heat, the overseer, the evening meal waiting somewhere beyond the temple walls. Yet the system around him says his labour participates in something older and larger than himself. Some have wondered whether this is the first faint shape of the so-called message hidden in the records. Not a spoken farewell from the Anunnaki, not a scene of shining beings vanishing into the sky, but a receipted idea, humanity placed within an order it did not design. The grounded reading is clear enough. Ancient societies often explained hierarchy through divine authority. If temples controlled land and labour, if kings claimed to rule by divine favour, then myth gave sacred language to power. The gods stood above the king. The king stood above officials. Officials stood above workers. The structure was human, but it was described as cosmic. Yet the unusual tidbit is harder to dismiss entirely, not because it is proven, but because it keeps returning in different forms. Sumerian and later Mesopotamian stories sometimes speak of divine plans, pre-human arrangements, and decrees that define the roles of beings before the familiar human world is fully formed. The gods do not appear merely as distant symbols. They administer, assign, debate, demand, and sometimes regret. In these stories, creation can feel less like a miracle and more like the beginning of a managed system. You keep walking. The sun lowers behind roof lines. A donkey brays. A potter turns a vessel with patient pressure. A scribe sits near a doorway with a damp tablet resting on his palm. His reed stylus moves with small, practiced cuts. Around him, the city continues in ordinary fragments. Laughter from a courtyard, a child crying, a trader arguing, flies gathering near fish, a priest passing without looking left or right. If you listen carefully, the city has two voices. One is practical, where it says count the grain, mend the canal, seal the jar, bring the sheep, record the names. The other is older and quieter. It says, remember who lowered order into the world. Remember who assigned the city its god. Remember that human life exists beneath powers that may not explain themselves. Scholars still debate how to approach these religious records. Are the myths symbolic reflections of social life? Are they theological compositions refined by scribal schools? Do they preserve older oral traditions from before writing? How much changed each time a story was copied, taught, adapted, or translated into another language? The uncertainty is not a weakness. It is part of the atmosphere. You are dealing with a civilization whose surviving voice comes through broken tablets, later copies, damaged lines, and languages that had already transformed before some of the texts were preserved. At the edge of the city, you pause near the marsh, reeds sway in the dusk. The water is dark now, and insects tremble above its surface. Somewhere beyond the visible channels, the old wetlands spread into a half-world of birds, boats, mud islands, and reflected stars. It is easy to understand why beginnings might be imagined here. Land and water mingle. Shapes rise from softness, a house, a wall. Even a tablet begins as wet clay and becomes form. Perhaps that is why Mesopotamian creation stories often feel so physical. They are not abstract. They are made of labour, bodies, materials, noise, hunger, and need. Even the divine world can seem crowded with tasks. Gods become tired. Lesser beings complain. Work must be redistributed. Humanity enters the story not as a shining crown of creation, but often as a solution to a problem of labour. That thought sits quietly in the dust. If humanity was imagined as a solution, then what was the problem? And if the gods or great powers once arranged the world for their own purposes, what might a final message from them sound like? It might not sound like comfort. It might sound like a reminder that every city, every king, every field, and every prayer rests on borrowed order. It might say that what has been built can be unbuilt. It might say that memory is a duty, not a possession. The first stars appear above the plain. In the city, lamps begin to glow. Their light trembles against mud-brick walls. The temple, still warm from the day, darkens into a massive shape against the fading sky. You feel the heat leaving the ground through your sandals. You smell smoke, clay, and river water cooling together. The city does not explain itself. It simply continues. And in that continuation, in the movement from canal to field, from field to storehouse, from storehouse to temple, from temple to tablet, you begin to sense how an ancient message could hide in plain sight, not as one secret phrase, but as a whole way of arranging the world. A world where humans build with clay, write on clay, sleep behind clay walls, and eventually return to the same dust that preserved their oldest questions. The tablet is cool when you imagine it in your palm, not cold like metal, not smooth like polished stone, but cool in the way dried earth can be cool after night has passed through it. Its surface is uneven. One corner is gone. A crack crosses the lines like a dried riverbed. The signs are small, angular, and patient, each one made by pressing a reed stylus into clay while the clay was still damp enough to receive memory. You hold it carefully, because it is not only an object, it is a survivor. Around you, the world has shifted into the dim hush of a tablet room. Shelves of clay records stand against mud brick walls. Some tablets are small and practical, made for accounts, lists, receipts, and school exercises. Others carry hymns, myths, royal inscriptions, lexical lists, omens, and fragments of stories whose full shape is no longer recoverable. The air smells of dust, old earth, dry reeds, and the faint ghost of smoke from lamps that once burned nearby. This is where ancient Mesopotamia becomes more than ruins. It becomes a voice. Cuneiform did not begin as poetry. It grew out of administration, with early signs used to track goods, labour, livestock, and temple resources. Over time, the system became capable of carrying names, grammar, praise, fear, law, lament, myth, and speculation. The practical and the sacred were never far apart. A tablet might record how much barley passed through a storehouse. Another might describe a goddess descending into the underworld. Both belonged to the same written universe. Both were part of the world's attempt to remain legible to itself. You watch a scribe at work. He sits low to the ground, his body folded in practiced stillness. Beside him rests a lump of prepared clay, damp enough to shape, firm enough to hold. He presses, turns, presses again. The stylus leaves wedges in rows. The motion is repetitive but not careless. Each sign must be remembered by the hand before it can be remembered by the reader. Somewhere nearby, an older teacher corrects a student's exercise. A young apprentice recites lists of words, signs, gods, cities, professions, and things in the world that must be named before they can be properly ordered. This is a grounded detail, and a quiet one. Mesopotamian scribal education relied heavily on copying. Students learned through repetition, lexical lists, model texts, and exercises. The act of copying was not merely mechanical. It trained the mind to inherit a tradition. A scribe did not simply write what he felt. He entered a chain of transmission, and chains can both preserve and distort. A story copied for centuries may remain alive, but it may also change its clothing. A phrase can be updated. A god's importance can rise or fall. A city's theology can colour a narrative. A damaged original can be restored from memory, guesswork, or local tradition. When you look at a Sumerian myth today, you may be looking at a copy of a copy, preserved in a later school, shaped by people already distant from the first telling. That is why the tablets feel so intimate and so uncertain. They are close enough for you to touch, but their beginnings are often out of reach. In one corner of this imagined archive, you find a tablet containing part of a king list. It does not read like a modern history book. It does not simply say who ruled, when, and where, with clean chronological confidence. It arranges kingship as something that moves from city to city, as if rule itself were a divine object passed through time. Some reigns, especially in the antediluvian portion of the tradition, stretched to lengths that no ordinary human life could hold. Tens of thousands of years gather around names that hover between myth, theology, and memory. Mainstream scholarship often reads these extraordinary reigns as symbolic, ideological, or mythic, not as literal historical chronology. They may express the grandeur of remote antiquity, the divine nature of kingship, or the prestige of certain cities. But the unusual detail remains strangely powerful. The record presents a world before the flood, a sequence of rulers before the known order, as though civilization had a shadow history older than the recoverable one. You do not have to accept the numbers literally to feel their effect. They create depth. They say that the visible world stands on something earlier. Nearby, another tablet carries a hymn. Its lines are broken, but you can sense the rhythm of praise. The temple is described as radiant, powerful, pure, terrifying, beloved. Its brickwork becomes cosmic. Its doors become thresholds. Its platform becomes a meeting place of heaven and earth. A building of mud brick is lifted by language until it becomes a centre of creation. In that transformation, you can hear how ancient people gave sacred meaning to constructed space. But there is a question scholars continue to debate. How should these texts be read when they treat cities and temples as cosmic realities? Are they describing belief, political theology, ritual performance, or poetic exaggeration? When a hymn says a temple reaches into heaven, is that metaphor liturgical truth, or a way of making the city feel eternal? The answer may shift with each text, and sometimes within a single line. You move along the shelves. Some tablets are not records in the simple sense, but fragments of instruction. They teach signs. They list professions. They arrange the world into categories: wood, reed, stone, metal, birds, fish, animals, gods, cities, rivers, offices, tools. The scribal mind does not merely tell stories. It classifies existence. It rebuilds the world in clay and order. This gives the mystery another shape. If the final message of the Anunnaki is hidden in these records, perhaps it is hidden not only in mythic scenes, but in classification itself. The ancient world seems deeply concerned with placing everything in its proper role. Gods have spheres, cities have patrons, Kings have duties, workers have obligations, rituals have times, stars have meanings, omens have interpretations. Even chaos must be named so it can be managed. Some have wondered whether such obsession with order reflects more than social control. Perhaps, in a speculative reading, it preserves the memory of a system handed down, or imagined as handed down, by beings who established categories before humans understood them. The mainstream explanation remains stronger and steadier. Complex societies need classification, and scribal cultures naturally produce lists, categories, and hierarchies. Yet the mythic imagination wraps this bureaucracy in cosmic clothing. The ledger and the divine decree begin to resemble each other. You turn toward a broken myth. Only part of it remains. A god speaks, but the lines are damaged, a name appears, then vanishes into a gap. A phrase about creation survives beside a missing passage. A later copy preserves one version, while another tablet preserves a variant. You can almost hear the silence where the clay has failed. It is not empty silence. It is shaped silence, the outline of something lost. This is where the records become most haunting. They do not merely tell you ancient stories. They force you to notice the damage. The missing lines make the reader a participant. Your mind leans into the gap and tries to complete it. Scholars do this carefully, comparing signs, grammar, duplicate manuscripts, and related compositions. Speculative readers do it more freely, sometimes too freely, filling the cracks with theories the tablets themselves cannot bear. The tension between caution and imagination is part of the experience. Too much caution, and the mystery dies. Too much imagination, and the ancient voice is drowned out by modern desire. So you stand between them. You look at the clay. You let it remain broken. The room grows darker. A lamp is lit. Its flame trembles, sending thin shadows across the rows of wedges. The tablet's surface changes under the light. Signs that seemed flat now deepen. The cracks become valleys. The missing corner becomes a small darkness where a sentence once continued. You begin to understand why clay fragments can feel like messages, not because they speak clearly, but because they survived incompletely. Stone monuments often try to command memory. Clay tablets do something softer. They accidentally endure. They are baked by accident in fires, buried by collapse, forgotten in rooms, hidden under later ruins. They do not always survive because someone planned eternity. They survive because disaster hardened them, because abandonment covered them, because the earth kept what people lost. That thought feels close to the heart of the story. If there was a final message, perhaps it survived in the same way, not as a perfect declaration, not as a preserved divine speech, but as impressions hardened by catastrophe. A king list here, a creation account there, a flood memory, a hymn to a temple, a myth of divine labour, a list of sages, a broken omen, a ritual instruction. Nothing complete alone, yet together suggesting that the ancients imagined humanity living inside a pattern established before ordinary history began. The scribe finishes his tablet and sets it aside. The clay is still damp. The signs shine slightly in the lamplight. Outside, the city murmurs towards sleep. Inside, the archive holds its breath. You place the cool fragment back where it belongs. You do not know what sentence is missing. You do not know whether the silence hides theology, poetry, politics, or a memory older than any king. But you feel more deeply now that these records are not dead objects. They are doors with pieces missing. They open only partly. They ask you to kneel near the dust, lower your voice, and listen for meaning in what remains. The deeper you move into the Sumerian past, the less it feels like walking along a road, and the more it feels like entering fog. At first, there are names, cities, rulers, bricks stamped with royal claims, temples rebuilt over older temples, graves, seals, pottery, tools, administrative tablets, traces of trade and labour. Archaeology gives you edges to hold. You can stand in a ruined city and understand that people lived there, worked there, feared hunger there, raised children there, buried the dead there. Then the path thins, the record begins to blur into traditions that speak of a time before the first dynasties can be held with confidence, a time before the kings whose monuments still carry their boasts, a time before the written horizon becomes stable enough to feel familiar. The ancient texts do not always treat this earlier world as empty. They fill it with rulers, divine decrees, immense spans of time, cities with sacred importance, and a flood that divides memory like a dark river. You find yourself standing before the idea of before, not the modern before, measured by charts and timelines, but the ancient before, where memory, ritual, myth, and political imagination flow together. The Sumerian king list is one of the most haunting examples. In its broad shape, it presents kingship as descending from heaven, then moving from city to city. It names rulers before and after a great flood. Some early reigns last thousands of years, far beyond ordinary human life. To a modern historian, this is not straightforward chronology. It is a text with purpose, ideology, theology, and literary design. Yet its atmosphere is difficult to forget. It does not simply begin with the world you can excavate. It looks past the visible ruins and says there was an order before this one. You may picture a scribe copying the list in a quiet schoolroom, repeating the names of rulers he never saw, cities that carried an aura of sacred age, reigns so long they seem to belong to another kind of time. Perhaps he's not troubled by the numbers. Perhaps to him they do not function as modern data. They may express greatness, remoteness, divine favour, or the difference between mythic time and human time. Still, the result is powerful. It stretches the imagination backward until history becomes a corridor with no visible end. Mainstream scholars often approach such lists as political and theological documents. They may have helped later rulers imagine Mesopotamian kingship as a single institution passed through various cities, creating unity out of competition. The idea that kingship was lowered from heaven gave earthly rule a divine frame. It made power feel older than any single dynasty. It suggested that kings did not invent authority, they received it. But one curious fringe interpretation lingers at the edge of the clay. Some readers have wondered whether the impossibly long reigns preserve a distorted memory of cycles far older than conventional history. Perhaps not literal individual lifespans, but echoes of dynastic ages, priestly eras, astronomical periods, or mythic memories of lost predecessors. This remains speculative. The tablet does not say this in plain language, but the possibility has a dreamlike pull, because the ancient record itself seems fascinated by a world that came before the world it knows. You step into that older landscape in imagination. There is no familiar city yet, or perhaps there is a city, but not one you can name with certainty. The horizon is wetter, the marshes spread wider, reeds stand tall as walls, boats slide through channels where the water reflects a hard white sky. Human settlements rise on mounds of earth above the damp plain. Fires burn low at night, dogs bark at unseen movement. The stars are clear, countless, and near enough to feel like a ceiling of signs. In such a place, memory would not be stored first in archives. It would live in voices, a flood remembered by grandparents, a shrine said to be older than the village, a ruler whose name was repeated until he became larger than life, a ritual whose original meaning had already faded, though the gestures remained. Long before a scribe pressed the story into clay, people may have carried versions of it in song, ceremony, and warning. Scholars debate how much early written myth preserves older oral tradition. Some lines may be ancient, others shaped by scribble schools. Some motifs may travel across languages and cultures. Others may be local, tied to one city's sacred identity. You cannot peel the layers cleanly apart. That is part of the mystery. The hidden timeline is not hidden because someone locked it away. It is hidden because ancient memory does not behave like modern history. It folds, it repeats, it magnifies. It turns social change into divine drama. It places political order inside cosmic descent. It remembers catastrophe by placing water between two ages. It gives the past a sacred architecture. You move through the fog of that architecture. There are cities named in old traditions whose early phases sink into the archaeological complexity of southern Mesopotamia. Eridu, often treated in later memory as a place of great antiquity, carries special weight. Archaeology has revealed long sequences of occupation in southern Mesopotamian sites, with temples rebuilt over earlier sacred structures. This layering matters. A later temple could stand over an older one, and beneath that an older one still, making sacred space feel literally stacked with time. Imagine standing at such a mound at dusk. Beneath your feet are floors no longer visible. Beneath those floors, older offerings. Beneath those, earlier walls. Each generation builds on what it inherited, perhaps knowing some of it, perhaps forgetting more. The mound rises not because one age replaces another completely, but because human life leaves sediment. The city becomes a memory made of earth. It is possible that ancient people sensed this depth, even without archaeology as we know it. They saw old bricks in new foundations. They heard names whose origins were unclear. They lived among ruins of their own past. They rebuilt temples and claimed continuity with founders whose lives had become myth. When their texts spoke of a remote time before known kings, they were not simply imagining emptiness. They were inhabiting a landscape already full of remains. This makes the idea of a final message more subtle. If the Anunnaki are understood as great divine powers within the Mesopotamian imagination, then their message would not need to appear at the end of a single event. It could be distributed across the ancient sense of time itself. It could be hidden in the division between before and after, before the flood, after the flood, before kingship settled, after kingship descended, before humans fully knew their role, after labour, law, ritual, and authority had been arranged. Some have wondered whether the ancient world preserved the feeling of an interrupted inheritance, a knowledge that arrived, was used, was damaged, and then was remembered only through symbols. The mainstream reading remains more cautious. Texts about antediluvian kings and divine origins reveal how Mesopotamians thought about authority, sacred legitimacy, and the vastness of the past. But even cautious readings admit that these texts are not simple. Their purpose is layered, and their relationship to older tradition remains debated. The fog thickens. You see a line of figures walking along a canal bank in the dim morning. They carry baskets. Their shadows stretch across the mud. No one among them knows he belongs to the dawn of recorded civilization. No one thinks of his time as early. There is always something older behind him, a story told by his mother, a ruined shrine outside the settlement, a name in a chant, a fear of water, a belief that order once came from beyond human hands. You begin to feel how strange the word beginning really is. For the archaeologist, a beginning may be the earliest layer yet uncovered. For the historian, it may be the first readable record. For the ancient scribe, it may be the moment kingship came down from heaven. For the myth, it may be the moment the gods arranged labour and destiny. For the listener in the dark, it may be the first time the question becomes personal. What has your own world forgotten beneath its visible foundations? The ancient timeline does not answer. It opens. It shows you a civilization that wrote early, yet remembered earlier. A society grounded in fields, canals, and temples, yet haunted by ages no human witness could verify. A people who lived in mud-brick cities beneath a wide sky, yet imagine their order descending from powers beyond the horizon. The last image is quiet. A scribe copies a name from an older tablet. He does not know whether the king was real, symbolic, divine, exaggerated, or all of these at once. He only knows the name belongs in the list. He presses it into clay. The sign remains. The certainty does not. Outside, the river moves through the dark, carrying silt from lands far away, laying down new earth over old earth, covering footprints, feeding fields, erasing banks, and making the world again from what it has taken apart. You begin to sense that the ancient world is not scattered randomly around you. At first it seems that way. A broken tablet here, a temple platform there, a seal impression pressed with tiny figures, a list of gods, a royal name stamped into brick, a myth of creation, a canal cut through the plain, a city wall rebuilt after war. Each piece appears separate, like debris left after a long storm of time, but when you sit with the fragments long enough, a pattern begins to show itself. Not a perfect pattern, not a secret code waiting to be solved with one dramatic key, something quieter, something more like a machine whose outer casing has broken away, leaving gears exposed beneath the dust. You do not yet know what every gear once did, but you can see that they touched. City touched temple, temple touched field, field touched labor, labor touched offering, offering touched God, God touched king, king touched law, law touched fate. The Sumerian world, like the wider Mesopotamian world that followed, was deeply organized around relationships between heaven, earth, city, and human duty. Nothing stood fully alone. A ruler was not merely a strong man with soldiers. A temple was not merely a building. A field was not merely food. Each belonged to a wider order that people believed had meaning beyond human convenience. You can feel that order most clearly near the temple. The air is cooler in the shade of the outer wall. Your fingers brush the rough surface of mud brick, sun-dried and uneven. Tiny bits of straw catch against your skin. Somewhere nearby, a worker carries a basket of dates. Another leads a goat toward an enclosure. The smell of wool, grain, clay, and warm animal breath gathers under the roofed passage. Inside, officials speak in low voices, and a scribe records what enters and what leaves. This is not only worship, it is administration. In many Sumerian cities, temples played major economic roles. They owned land, organized labor, stored goods, and redistributed resources. The sacred household of a deity could function as a powerful institution within the city's material life. To modern eyes, this may look like bureaucracy. To ancient eyes, it may have been bureaucracy with a cosmic heartbeat. You pause beside a doorway and listen. The stylus moves. The tablet receives. A name is pressed into clay. A quantity is marked. A delivery becomes part of the record. Nothing mystical seems to happen, and yet the act is surrounded by sacred architecture. This is the strange beauty of the system. The divine does not float above the city in abstraction. It descends into jars, sheep, labour crews, rations, festivals, bricks, and fields. If you were trying to reconstruct the hidden machinery of this civilization, you would begin here. The city is a house for its god. The temple is the god's earthly centre. The king or ruler maintains order under divine authority. The people sustain the city through labour and offerings. The scribes preserve the agreements, lists, hymns, and memories that keep the arrangement coherent. Around this, myths explain why such a structure exists at all. That is where the Anunnaki enter the atmosphere of the story. Not as modern inventions or simple figures, but as part of a much older divine landscape. In different Mesopotamian traditions, the Anunnaki appear as a group of deities connected with power, fate, the underworld, and the great assembly of divine beings. Their role is not identical in every text. Sometimes the term feels broad, sometimes it feels specialized, sometimes later, traditions reshape earlier ideas. Scholars still debate how the identity and function of the Anunnaki changed across periods. Cities and languages. Were they originally a specific class of gods? A collective name for important deities? A group linked to the earth, an underworld, a divine court? The answer depends on the text, the time, and the tradition. The uncertainty is not a small footnote. It is central to the mood. These beings cannot be flattened into one easy definition, without losing the ancient complexity that made them powerful. Yet one thing remains important. They belong to the idea of divine order. And order is everywhere. You see it in the city plan. Though the streets are not neat in a modern way, lanes twist between houses, courtyards open unexpectedly, walls lean with age, drains carry waste badly or well depending on the place. But the deeper order is social and sacred. People know where they stand in relation to household, temple, ruler, field, festival, debt, oath, and God. This order does not mean life is gentle. It can be harsh, unequal, and exhausting. But it gives the city a structure that claims to be more than human preference. This is where a curious fringe thought quietly approaches. Some have wondered whether the ancient records preserve not just religious imagination, but the memory of a designed social system attributed to beings beyond ordinary humanity. In that reading, the gods are not only symbols of nature or power, they become remembered organizers, the ones who arranged civilization and then left its pattern behind. The idea cannot be treated as established history. It belongs to interpretation and speculation. But it has survived in modern fascination because the ancient texts often describe order as something received, not invented. The safer reading, and the one most historians would begin with, is that human societies often place their institutions under divine protection. Doing so makes them stable. It makes labour meaningful. It makes kingship legitimate. It makes hierarchy feel inevitable. In a difficult landscape where flood, drought, salinization, disease, and war could undo a city, sacred order may have been both explanation and comfort. But comfort is not the only feeling in the texts. Sometimes order feels heavy. You can sense that heaviness in myths where work becomes a divine problem. In certain Mesopotamian creation traditions, the gods themselves are troubled by labour, and humans are brought into existence to bear the burden. The details differ by text and period, but the theme is striking. Humanity is not always created for glory. Humanity is made useful. Human life begins inside obligation. The thought settles over the courtyard like evening dust. If humans were imagined as created to maintain the world of the gods, then the system is not merely devotional, it is transactional. People feed the gods through offerings. Temples house them. Rituals honour them. Labour sustains their earthly presence. In return, the gods provide order, fertility, kingship, protection, or at least the possibility of stability in a dangerous universe. But what happens when the transaction weakens? What happens when cities fall, temples burn, languages change, and the gods become distant names in clay? Perhaps the final message, if one can be imagined from the surviving patterns, is not a sentence spoken at the end of time. Perhaps it is the residue of a system that once told humans, your world is held together by roles, and when roles are forgotten, the structure trembles. You walk deeper into the city as twilight gathers. A festival may be approaching. You see women preparing bread, men clean vessels, a musician tests the tension of strings. Children are told to keep away from a doorway. The temple staff moves with more urgency than before. The sacred calendar matters because time itself must be ordered. Days are not only days. They are occasions for offerings, rituals, observances, and duties. Human time must be tied to divine time. The ancient Mesopotamians developed complex calendars and ritual cycles, often connected to lunar observation and civic religious life. This practical and sacred measurement of time helped coordinate agriculture, festivals, and administration. The world moved in cycles, planting and harvest, flood and recession, new moon and full moon, rain and succession, destruction and rebuilding. Cycles are one of the gears in the hidden machine. A city falls, another rises. Kingship moves. Temples decay, then are restored. The flood divides memory, yet memory continues. The gods withdraw, yet their names remain. Humans forget, then copy, then misread, then wonder. There is no single straight line. There is return, repetition, restoration, and loss. The unusual tidbit is that some later Mesopotamian traditions imagined wisdom itself as something that existed before catastrophe, and then had to be preserved afterward through sages, rituals, or secret knowledge. This idea gives the system a fragile, almost haunted feeling. Civilization becomes not only progress, but recovery. Humans are not simply building forward, they are trying, perhaps unknowingly, to maintain something inherited from a damaged earlier order. A cautious scholar might say this is how cultures describe continuity after disaster. A speculative listener might wonder whether ancient people were remembering an actual rupture, a break so deep it became mythic. The records do not let either side rest completely. You stand at the centre of the courtyard. Above you, the sky has darkened to blue-black. The first lamps burn. Their flames flicker against mud brick and plaster. The city's sounds grow softer, but the system does not sleep. Grain remains in storage. Tablets dry on shelves. The temple door holds its darkness. Somewhere, a king's name waits to be spoken in a ritual. Somewhere, a worker dreams of rest. You begin to understand that the sacred order is not a backdrop to the story. It is the story. If there is a final message hidden in the records of the Anunnaki, it may be encoded in this arrangement of life, that civilization is a fragile agreement between memory and power, between labor and meaning, between what humans build and what they believe stands above them, and like any machine made of clay, breath, grain, and fear, it can run for a long time while already beginning to crack. The city wakes before the sun fully rises. You hear it first as a low stirring behind mud brick walls. A baby cries. A door curtain shifts. Someone coughs in the dry air. A goat complains from a courtyard. Then comes the sound of grinding grain. The slow scrape of stone against stone, steady and circular, as if morning itself must be ground into being before anyone can eat. The smell is simple and heavy. Flour dust, smoke, damp clay, warm bodies, and last night's ashes. In the half-light, people move toward their tasks without ceremony. A woman kneels beside a quern. A man lifts a basket. A child carries a small jar with both hands. Somewhere beyond the houses, labourers gather near a canal bank, waiting for instruction, tools, and heat. This is where the ancient mythic question becomes painfully human. Why were people made to work? It is not a modern question only. It seems to have lived deep inside Mesopotamian imagination. In several creation traditions from the wider Mesopotamian world, divine beings struggle with labour, noise, burden, or the maintenance of existence. Humanity appears not merely as an ornament of creation, but as part of a solution. Humans take up work that lesser gods, in some stories, no longer wish to bear. The exact details differ across texts and periods, and scholars carefully separate Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, and later traditions. But the broad idea remains striking. Human beings are created into responsibility. You walk with the labourers toward the canal. The ground cools your feet at first, then slowly warms. The sky becomes pale copper. Reeds rustle along the water's edge. Men step into the mud with baskets and tools. Their work is repetitive, wet, exhausting, and essential. A blocked canal can starve a field. A broken levee can ruin a district. A city survives only because bodies return day after day to tasks that never feel finished. This is a grounded part of Mesopotamian life. Agriculture in southern Mesopotamia depended on irrigation, and irrigation depended on organised labour. Water had to be moved and managed. Fields needed drainage. Silt had to be cleared. Salinity could damage the land. The environment was generous only when handled carefully, and even then it could turn difficult. So the myth of human labour did not arise in a world of leisure. It arose in a place where work was the price of survival. But mythology changes the feeling of that price. If labour is only necessity, then the canal is a problem of water and earth. If labour is sacred duty, then the canal becomes part of a divine arrangement. Your aching hands are not merely human hands. They are hands placed into a cosmic system. The basket on your shoulder becomes more than mud and reeds. It becomes evidence of your role. Perhaps that is why the old creation stories can feel both comforting and unsettling. They tell you that human work matters. They also tell you that human work may have begun as service to powers beyond human consent. You stand beside a man lifting clay from the canal bed. His back bends. Mud runs down his arms. He does not speak. The morning is still too early for complaint. Behind him, another worker wipes sweat from his neck. Nearby, an overseer counts baskets. A scribe may later record rations. Barley, oil, wool, and beer move through the city's system, binding labour to administration and administration to temple or palace. The world is practical. Then quietly, as it becomes mythic, some Mesopotamian stories describe humans as fashioned from clay, sometimes mixed with divine substance in later traditions, linking the human body to earth and the sacred at once. The detail is deeply symbolic. Clay is everywhere in this land. It forms tablets, bricks, seals, walls, ovens, figurines, and riverbanks. To imagine humans formed from clay is to imagine them made from the same material as civilization itself. You look at your own hands in the dream of the story. Dust clings to the skin. Under the nails is a thin line of earth. You can understand why clay would become the language of origins. Clay can be shaped. Clay can receive marks. Clay can harden. Clay can break. Clay can return to dust. It is humble and miraculous, ordinary and permanent only by accident. The unusual fringe thought appears softly here, not as a claim, but as a question some have carried into the dark. If ancient myths describe human creation as deliberate design, could they preserve a distant memory of alteration, selection, or guided development? Some modern speculative readers have taken the creation of humans for labour and interpreted it through ideas of intervention by advanced beings. This reading is not accepted as historical evidence. The tablets do not provide modern scientific description. They speak in the symbolic, theological, and literary language of their world. Still, the unease remains. Why did ancient people imagine themselves as made for a task? The mainstream answer may be the strongest. People living inside labour-heavy societies explain their condition through sacred narrative. Myth reflected reality upward, because humans worked for temples, fields, kings, and households. The stories imagined humanity itself as born into service. Creation became a mirror of social order, but mirrors are strange things. They show what stands before them, and sometimes they reveal what people are afraid to say directly. Perhaps the myth of labour says we are tired. Perhaps it says our work must matter or life is unbearable. Perhaps it says the powers above us require too much. Perhaps it says we were made useful before we were made free. You leave the canal as the sun climbs higher. The air shimmers. The workers move slowly now, each gesture heavier than the last. The city in the distance looks bright and hard, its walls the colour of baked bread. Smoke rises from many roofs. Somewhere inside, a temple meal is being prepared. Offerings will be presented. The divine household must be fed. This relationship between gods and offerings is central to much ancient Mesopotamian religion. Humans maintained the gods' temples, provided food and drink in ritual form, clothed divine statues, celebrated festivals, and upheld the order of worship. To modern ears, the idea may sound strange, but within the ancient system it made sense. The gods gave the world structure and abundance. Humans responded through service, yet scholars continue to debate how ordinary people understood this relationship. Did they feel personal devotion, civic obligation, fear, gratitude, habit, or all of these together? Did the priestly view match the feelings of farmers, potters, mothers, soldiers, and servants? The surviving texts often come from elite scribal contexts, which means the voice of the tired canal worker reaches us only indirectly. The tablets speak, but not equally for everyone. This uncertainty opens a quiet hollow beneath the story. The records tell us what the system said humanity was for. They do not fully tell us how every human heart felt inside that system. You enter a small house at midday. The room is dim after the glare outside. A clay jar stands near the wall. Flatbread rests under cloth. A child sleeps with one arm across his face. The air smells of barley, dust, and warm reeds. For a moment, the question of cosmic purpose feels far away. Human life is here, immediate and tender. Hunger, rest, family, thirst, pain in the shoulder, relief in the shade. If humans were made to serve the gods, they also loved their children. If they were placed into a cosmic labour system, they still whispered, laughed, envied, mourned, and hoped. This is important. Without it, the ancient message becomes too cold. The records may describe humanity's role in sacred and social terms, but real human beings always exceed the roles assigned to them. A worker is more than labour. A priest is more than ritual. A king is more than title. A scribe is more than hand and stylus. Every system simplifies life so it can manage it. Every life quietly resists being fully managed. Maybe that resistance is part of what the later mystery senses. Some have wondered whether the final message attributed in imagination to the Anunnaki could be a warning about creation itself. To create a servant is also to create a witness. To assign labour is also to awaken memory. A being made to carry baskets may begin to ask who ordered the carrying. A being made to feed the gods may begin to wonder why gods hunger. A being made from clay may learn to write on clay. And then the servant becomes the keeper of the story. That is a powerful reversal. In the mythic frame, humans may be made to work for divine powers. In the historical frame, humans are the ones who preserve the gods. Without scribes, tablets, rituals, and memory, the names of the gods fade. Without human hands, even divine stories vanish into unmarked earth. You sit in the shadow of the house as afternoon slows. Outside, the city continues its endless exchange of effort and meaning. Grain becomes bread, mud becomes brick, clay becomes tablet, breath becomes prayer, pain becomes story, duty becomes civilization. The final message, if it is hidden here, may not be gentle. It may say that humanity was born into work, but not only work. It may say that those who are made to serve can become those who remember. It may say that the hand shaped from clay can one day hold the record of its own shaping. And in that thought, quiet but immense, the ancient system begins to feel less like a closed machine and more like something unstable, something capable of surprise. The canal still needs clearing. The temple still expects offerings. The city still depends on tired bodies rising each morning. But somewhere, in a room smelling of wet clay and reed, a scribe presses signs into a tablet, and the role assigned to humanity changes slightly. The worker becomes witness. The servant becomes storyteller. The created being becomes the keeper of the Creator's fading names. The water is still when you first see him. He stands at the edge of the marsh where the reeds grow thick and high, their green stems whispering in a wind too soft to cool the air. Behind him, the city waits in the distance, low and square beneath the pale sky. Before him, the water opens into channel, pools, mud banks, and mirrored light. Birds move through the reeds with sudden flashes of wing. Somewhere, a fish breaks the surface and leaves widening rings behind. the figure does not belong entirely to the city. He seems to come from the threshold between land and water, between human settlement and the older wet world from which the land itself was patiently drawn. In later Mesopotamian traditions, beings known as Apkallu, ancient sages, were remembered as bringers of wisdom, arts, rituals, and civilizing knowledge. Some were linked to the time before the flood. Some were imagined with strange forms, associated with fish-like garments or hybrid imagery in later iconography. They are not simple characters. They stand at the edge of myth, priesthood, memory, and symbol. You watch him from the bank. He does not speak at first. He carries knowledge the way a reed carries water inside its hollow stem, hidden but real. Around him, the marsh breathes. The smell is wet clay, fish, salt, birds, and green decay. It is not the smell of a palace or a school. It is older, less controlled. The city may count and classify the world, but the marsh reminds you that everything once began in softness, movement, and uncertainty. The Apkallu are often understood by scholars as mythic sages or culture heroes, figures who helped explain the origins of civilized knowledge. In later traditions, 7 antediluvian sages are sometimes associated with kings before the flood, each linked to wisdom that came before catastrophe. Their memory appears most clearly in texts later than early Sumer, and the traditions are layered, changing across time. That matters, because the farther a figure travels through centuries, the more meanings gather around him. Still, the idea is quietly powerful. Civilization does not teach itself. Someone brings the arts. Someone teaches ritual. Someone measures. Someone names. Someone shows how to build, purify, write, calculate, heal, observe, and remember. Whether these teachers are gods, sages, priests, ancestors, or literary symbols depends on the reading. But ancient Mesopotamian imagination often treated knowledge as something transmitted from a sacred source, not merely invented by clever hands. You imagine the sage walking toward the city. At the canal, workers stop and stare. Children hide behind doorways. A priest watches from beneath the shadow of a wall. The figure carries no weapon. His authority is different. He brings procedures, patterns, words, gestures, perhaps even prohibitions. He teaches how an offering should be made, how a foundation might be purified, how illness might be addressed, how omens might be read, how the boundary between human and divine should be approached without tearing. A curious fringe thought has long attached itself to these figures. Some modern interpreters have wondered whether the Apkallu preserve a distant memory of visitors, teachers, or advanced survivors from an earlier age. The fish-like imagery, the pre-flood setting, and the sudden arrival of knowledge have encouraged such speculation. It remains outside mainstream historical evidence. The safer reading sees them as priestly ideals, mythic culture bringers, and symbolic embodiments of wisdom. Yet the fascination persists because the stories speak in the language of inheritance. They imply that humans received crucial knowledge from someone who stood closer to the divine order. You follow him through a gate, the city seems to shift as he enters it. Not because walls move, but because meaning gathers. A measuring cord becomes more than cord. A brick mould becomes more than a tool. A basin becomes more than water. Knowledge changes ordinary things by giving them place and sequence. Do this first. Speak these words. Wash in this way. Build on this day. Watch that star. Avoid that omen. Store the tablet. Teach the child. This is how a civilization becomes durable, not only through walls, but through repeatable forms. The mainstream historical detail here is simple and essential. Mesopotamian scholarship was cumulative. Scribes preserved lists, rituals, omens, mathematical procedures, medical texts, hymns, and myths over long periods. Knowledge was copied, systematized, and transmitted through institutions. The idea of wisdom as inherited from the deep past fit naturally into such a world. A scribe could feel that he was not creating knowledge fresh each morning. He was carrying a flame passed through many hands. But every flame casts shadows. Scholars still debate how to understand the relationship between mythic sages and actual scholarly or priestly professions. Were the Apkallu primarily mythological ancestors of learned experts? Were they tied to specific ritual roles? Did their stories legitimize later scholars by giving them divine ancestry? How much of the tradition reflects older Sumerian ideas, and how much belongs to later Babylonian and Assyrian intellectual culture? The answers do not settle easily. The figure at the marsh remains partly veiled. You enter a scribal room where boys repeat signs under their breath. Their voices are low, rhythmic, sleepy. The teacher's reed taps against a tablet. Outside, sun falls hard on the courtyard. Inside, the shade smells of dust, damp clay, and human concentration. One boy presses too deeply and ruins a sign. Another smooths his tablet and begins again. This is not glamorous. Wisdom arrives through correction, repetition, boredom, and patience. Perhaps that is why the sages feel almost supernatural. They represent the finished form of what students slowly become. The ancient world understood that knowledge could be dangerous as well as useful. Ritual words had to be correct. Omens required interpretation. A mistake in purification or divination might be frightening, not merely embarrassing. Knowledge was power because it touched uncertainty. It allowed human beings to negotiate with forces they could not control. Sickness, flood, drought, royal fate, childbirth, death, eclipse, dream, and war. If a final message lies hidden in the pattern of the Apkallu, it may concern knowledge itself. Knowledge is a gift. Knowledge is a burden. Knowledge survives disaster only if someone carries it forward. And knowledge, once given to humans, cannot be fully taken back. You pause in the schoolroom and look at the tablets drying along the wall. Some contain clumsy student exercises. Some may one day be discarded. Others may be copied into clearer form. A few may be buried by accident and wait thousands of years under collapsed brick. The room feels ordinary, but the act taking place inside it is immense. The human mind is learning to store itself outside the body. That may be the quiet transformation the myths do not fully explain. When divine or semi-divine teachers bring knowledge to humanity, they also create memory independent of living voice. They create the possibility that humans can outlast their teachers. A god may withdraw, a sage may vanish, a king may die. But a tablet can remain in the dark, saying something to a person not yet born. The figure from the marsh stands near the doorway, or perhaps you only imagine him there. His face is unreadable. The light behind him is silver from the water. He seems both ancient and temporary, like a reflection that might disappear if the surface is disturbed. Some have wondered whether the so-called final message of the Anunnaki could have passed not through kings, but through sages. Not a command to rule, but a method to remember. Not a secret hidden in one temple chamber, but a disciplined chain of preservation. Learn the signs, copy the list, keep the ritual, watch the sky, record the flood, rebuild the house of the god, tell the story again, even when you no longer understand every part of it. The evening returns quietly. The marsh darkens. Reeds turn black against the copper horizon. Birds settle into the wet places. In the city, a student rubs his tired eyes while his teacher corrects one final line. The tablet is not beautiful. The signs are uneven. But the act has been done. A fragment of order has moved from one mind into clay. You leave the schoolroom with a sense that wisdom in this world is never fully human and never fully divine. It passes between, and perhaps that is what makes it fragile. A message can survive only if the receiver remains faithful. But receivers are mortal. They misread. They forget. They simplify. They protect what they understand and sometimes protect what they do not. The sages may have brought knowledge from the edge of the old world, but the human city had to carry it through dust, hunger, ambition, conquest, and sleep. By the water, the last light fades. The figure at the marsh is gone, or has become indistinguishable from reeds and shadow. Only the tablets remain, drying in the dark, holding the marks of students who never knew they were helping the deep past speak. Rain is rare enough here that when it comes, people look up. You feel the first drops on your face in the darkness before dawn. They are warm at first, scattered and uncertain, leaving small marks in the dust. Then more arrive, tapping on reed roofs, darkening mud brick walls, gathering in shallow hollows along the street. The smell rises immediately, deep and mineral, the smell of dry earth remembering water. Somewhere a dog barks, somewhere a child wakes frightened. A woman steps into a doorway and listens. The rain itself is not yet disaster. It is only weather, but in a land shaped by rivers, canals, marshes, and seasonal change, water is never only water. It is life when it comes in order. It is ruin when it comes without measure. The ancient Mesopotamian world carried flood memories with unusual force. The best-known version for many modern readers comes through later Akkadian and Babylonian traditions, especially the flood story woven into the Epic of Gilgamesh. But older Sumerian material also preserves flood themes, including the figure often called Ziusudra, a survivor warned of destruction. These traditions differ in details, names, theology, and emphasis. But together they suggest that flood was not a passing image. It was one of the deep structures through which Mesopotamians imagine rupture and renewal. You step into a street where water is beginning to move. At first it only threads between stones and compacted earth. Then it gathers into small streams carrying straw, ash, and bits of broken pottery. The city, so carefully ordered in sun, becomes uncertain in rain. Walls soften, drains struggle, courtyards flood. People lift baskets from the floor. A man curses as water seeps under a storage room door. The temple's high platform remains above the street, but even there, the air feels tense. Flood in this world does not need to cover the whole planet to feel like the end of everything. A regional flood can swallow fields, erase boundaries, drown animals, collapse houses, contaminate stores, and turn a known landscape into water and mud. Archaeologists have found flood deposits at some Mesopotamian sites, though not one simple universal layer matching every legend. That detail matters. The historical reality of flooding in river civilizations is strong, while the relationship between specific deposits and literary flood traditions remains debated. The texts preserve memory, theology, and imagination together, not a modern disaster report. Still, you can understand how such a memory becomes sacred. When the water rises, the world loses its names. A field is no longer a field. A road is no longer a road. A courtyard is no longer a courtyard. Water covers distinctions. It erases human lines and returns everything to a dangerous kind of beginning. In that moment, order seems borrowed, temporary, fragile. The city that took generations to build can become, in one night, a place of shouting and floating debris. This is why the flood belongs so deeply to the hidden timeline. It divides memory. There's the time before the water, and the time after. In the old stories, the flood is not just an accident of weather. It comes from divine decision, divine frustration, divine secrecy, or a cosmic need to reset what has gone wrong. One figure receives warning. He builds or prepares. He survives. Life continues, but not unchanged. Something has been severed. The world after the flood carries memory of a lost world before it. Some have wondered whether this structure conceals the shape of a final message. If the divine powers, or the Anunnaki within the wider mythic assembly, once judged the human world, then perhaps the warning was not only about water, perhaps it was about excess, noise, imbalance, disobedience, overgrowth, or the danger of a creation that no longer fit the purpose assigned to it. This remains interpretation. The records do not speak in a single voice. They differ, and their meanings shift across time. Yet the emotional core is steady. Humanity survives because a message is given. A warning crosses the boundary between divine counsel and mortal life. You imagine that warning not as thunder, but as a whisper through a wall, a dream in the sleeping hours, a voice carried by reeds, a command half understood by someone chosen not for power, but for listening. The quietness makes it more unsettling. Disaster approaches, but the world continues as usual. Bread is baked, animals are fed, children argue. A boatmaker sharpens a tool. Clouds gather beyond the edge of ordinary attention. The unusual fringe tidbit appears in the way flood stories across many cultures have invited comparisons. Some modern readers connect Mesopotamian flood traditions with memories of ancient sea level rise, Black Sea hypotheses, or other prehistoric inundations. These ideas vary widely in credibility and remain debated. It is tempting to connect every flood myth to one forgotten global event, but careful scholarship resists simple answers. Myths travel. Floods happen in many places. Human beings remember catastrophe through the shapes their cultures provide. The tablets do not ask you to solve every flood. They ask you to notice what water does to time. In the dimness, the rain grows heavier. The canal swells. Men rush toward a weak bank with baskets and tools. Their feet sink into mud. A woman ties household objects in a cloth. Someone leads animals to higher ground. Someone else stands frozen, unable to decide what matters enough to carry. What would you save if the world began to dissolve? A seal bearing your name? A tablet of accounts? A child's toy? A god statue? A loaf of bread? The question is simple, and that is why it hurts. Civilization is full of systems, but catastrophe makes choices intimate. The great order of gods, kings, temples, fields, and records collapses into the reach of two human hands. In some Mesopotamian traditions, the flood survivor preserves life by obeying warning, building carefully, and carrying living things across destruction. This is not only survival, it is transmission. The survivor becomes a bridge. He carries the before into the after, but what he carries is incomplete. No survivor saves the whole world. Something always remains beneath the water. Scholars continue to debate the development of Mesopotamian flood literature. How did older Sumerian traditions relate to later Akkadian versions? Which details were inherited, adapted, expanded, or reshaped for theological reasons? How did local flood memories become cosmic narrative? These questions remain open because the evidence is uneven. The tablets survive in fragments, and the stories themselves changed as they moved through scribal culture. That uncertainty feels appropriate. A flood story should not be too complete. It should leave silt in the corners. It should leave names missing. It should leave a silence where the drowned world used to be. You stand now at the edge of the rising water. The city's lamps tremble in reflections. The temple platform rises above the dark like a memory refusing to sink. Rain runs down your face. The air smells of mud, fear, and wet reeds crushed underfoot. Somewhere beyond the storm, the myth says, a decision has already been made. Somewhere within the storm, a warning has already been heard, and somewhere beneath the water lies the part of the message no one could carry forward. Perhaps that is why the flood returns again and again in ancient thought. It is not only punishment, it is not only cleansing, it is the terrible reminder that order is temporary unless it is renewed, remembered, and protected. Even the world arranged by divine powers can be covered over. Even the first cities can become mud. Even sacred names can vanish if no one survives to speak them. By dawn, the rain has softened. Water still moves through the streets, but the sky is paling. People emerge slowly, shocked by what remains and what does not. A wall has collapsed. A storage room is ruined. A family is missing. A goat stands trembling on a raised step. The city is wounded, but not silent. Someone will count the damage. Someone will rebuild the wall. Someone will dry the tablets that can still be saved. Someone will tell the story of the night the water came, and as that story passes from mouth to mouth, from memory to clay, from clay to broken fragment, the flood becomes more than an event. It becomes a boundary stone in time, marking the place where an older world disappeared and a changed humanity stepped out into the mud, carrying only what it could bear. The phrase feels simple until you sit with it in the dark. Kingship was lowered from heaven. You hear it as if it has been spoken softly in a room where everyone already knows its weight, not shouted, not explained, simply placed into the air like a sacred object. Kingship was lowered from heaven, and with that sentence, the ancient world rearranges itself. Rule is no longer only the result of strength, inheritance, war, wealth, or agreement. It becomes something received from above, something older than the person who wears the crown. You stand in a courtyard at first light. The city is awake, but not yet loud. A pale glow touches mud brick walls. The air smells of ash, damp straw, and cooling bread. Near the temple, officials gather in garments brushed clean of dust. A few carry staffs. A scribe holds a tablet against his chest. Workers wait at the edge of the space, careful not to step where they should not. In the centre, a ruler approaches, not yet magnificent in the way later empires will carve kings into stone, but already surrounded by distance. Distance is part of power. The ruler is human. He breathes. He sweats beneath the rising sun. He worries about grain, enemies, canals, labour, loyalty, omens, succession, and the mood of the gods. Yet the city cannot treat him as merely human. It needs him to stand between the ordinary and the sacred, between the field and the divine decree, between the anxiety of daily life and the dream that someone has been appointed to hold the world in balance. This is one of the central historical realities of ancient Mesopotamia. Kingship was inseparable from religion, city identity, warfare, land management, and temple patronage. Rulers built and restored temples. They claimed divine favour. They presented themselves as shepherds of the people, servants of the gods, protectors of order, and guardians of justice. Their inscriptions were not modern political speeches, but they were also not simple prayers. They shaped memory. They told the future how power wished to be understood. You watch as the ruler enters the sacred precinct. There is no need for thunder. The ritual authority is in the quiet details. Water poured over hands, incense rising, a name spoken in the right place, a garment adjusted, a statue approached, a tablet read, a seal pressed. Power becomes real because many people perform its reality together. The old king lists deepen this performance by placing rule within a vast sequence. Kingship descends. It resides in one city. It moves to another. Cities rise and lose favour. Rule passes through disaster and returns. This is not history in the modern sense alone. It is a theology of political time. It tells each city that its moment of power belongs to a larger pattern, and it tells each ruler that his authority is never truly his own. That idea can comfort a society. It can also control it. If kingship comes from heaven, then obedience can become sacred. Rebellion can become cosmic danger. A failed harvest may be read not only as environmental trouble, but as a sign of divine displeasure. A defeated king may seem abandoned by the powers that once favoured him. Political events acquire theological shadows, and those shadows can be long. Scholars debate how ancient audiences understood such claims. Did ordinary people believe the king held divine authority in a literal sense? Did they accept the language as ritual convention? Did temple scholars use it to explain changing political fortunes? Did different cities shape the idea differently depending on their needs? The surviving records give us royal voices more clearly than the voices of farmers, widows, prisoners, and workers. We know much about how power described itself. We know less about how every listener received that description. You move past the courtyard into the shaded side of a temple wall. Here, The bricks are rough under your fingers. Their warmth is beginning to rise with the day. You see an inscription, or imagine one, pressed into brick by order of a ruler who wished his name to remain. The message is partly devotional, partly political, partly architectural. It says, in effect, I built, I restored, I served the god, remember me. The desire is deeply human. Even a king who claims heavenly sanction fears disappearance. The unusual fringe thought enters quietly through the old phrase. If kingship was lowered from heaven, some modern speculative readers have wondered whether the text preserves memory of an authority structure believed to originate outside ordinary human society. In their reading, the Anunnaki or great divine powers did not merely bless kings after the fact. They established rule as a technology of order, something handed down to organize humanity. This interpretation goes beyond mainstream evidence, yet it draws its force from the ancient wording itself, from the sense that rule descends rather than emerges. The cautious historical reading is steadier. The phrase expresses sacred legitimacy. It gives political authority a cosmic origin. It may help unify competing city traditions into one broad story of transferred kingship. It may also reflect a world where cities constantly struggled for dominance, and theology helped explain why one city rose while another fell. But even the cautious reading leaves room for awe. Why did ancient people imagine power as something that comes down? You look upward. The sky above the city is pale and immense. No ceiling, no visible throne, only light. Birds cross it briefly, then vanish beyond the roofline. To say that kingship descends from heaven is to picture authority entering the human world from a region no hand can touch. It is to make power both present and unreachable. The king stands before you, but the source of kingship remains elsewhere. This distance matters to the hidden message. If human labour was assigned and wisdom transmitted, then kingship becomes another part of the system. The world is not only made, it is governed. It is not only taught, it is ranked. It is not only remembered, it is administered. City by city, the mechanism turns. A ruler commands canal work. The fields produce grain. Grain feeds households and temples. Temples maintain divine presence. Divine favour legitimizes the ruler. Scribes record the structure. Myths explain its origin. Rituals renew it. When the system works, it can feel eternal. When it fails, it can feel like the heavens themselves have withdrawn. The idea of withdrawal is important. Ancient Mesopotamian city laments often describe ruined cities as abandoned by their gods, their temples desolate, their streets empty, their music silenced. Such texts turn political catastrophe into sacred grief. A city does not merely fall to enemies. Its divine protection departs, or is imagined as having departed. The loss of power becomes the loss of presence. You enter that image for a moment, a throne room with dust on the floor, a temple court where weeds grow between bricks, a gate hanging open, a place once full of offerings now visited by wind, clay tablets cracked under fallen roofing, a royal name still visible on a brick though the dynasty is gone. Kingship may descend, but it does not stay forever. That may be the warning hidden inside the grandeur. Power is borrowed. Rule is temporary. No city holds heaven permanently. Some have wondered whether the final message left by the Anunnaki, if imagined through these records, might be less about gods departing the earth and more about the instability of every system they were believed to have given. Labour can be organised. Knowledge can be transmitted. Kingship can be lowered. But none of it guarantees permanence. The gift of order may also be a test of whether humans can carry it without mistaking possession for ownership. The ruler in the courtyard receives honour. For a moment, the city believes in him, or needs to believe. The musicians play softly. A priest speaks. The people watch. The sun climbs higher. Dust begins to rise under many feet. Then the moment passes into routine. Orders must be given. Disputes must be judged. Labour must be assigned. Enemies must be watched. Storehouses must be sealed. The sacred aura of kingship must descend into the exhausting details of administration. A ruler who cannot maintain canals may still claim heaven, but hunger will argue with him. A ruler who neglects justice may still build temples, but the people will remember differently. A ruler who loses the city may become only a name in someone else's list. You begin to feel the human sadness inside the royal idea. Kingship was lowered from heaven, but kings were made of flesh. They aged. They feared. They failed. They ordered others to build monuments against forgetting, yet many were forgotten. They spoke in the language of eternity while living inside the same dust as everyone else. The scribe records the ceremony. His stylus presses the ruler's name into clay. Perhaps the tablet will survive. Perhaps it will break. Perhaps future scholars will read it as ideology, devotion, evidence, exaggeration, or all of these at once. Perhaps some future listener will wonder whether the phrase lowered from heaven hides a memory too old for certainty. Evening comes again. The ruler's courtyard is empty now. The brick still holds the day's heat. The temple wall is dark. Somewhere in the city, a poor family eats bread in silence. Somewhere else, an official counts jars. A dog sleeps near a doorway. Above everything, the sky remains open, vast and unreadable. And the old phrase continues to hover. Kingship was lowered from heaven, not given forever, not fully explained, not safe from flood, fire, conquest or forgetting, only lowered, for a time, into human hands. A city can remember in ways a person cannot. It remembers through foundations buried under foundations, through bricks reused in later walls, through shrines rebuilt so often that the ground beneath them rises into a mound, through names spoken in rituals long after the first meaning has dimmed, through streets that change shape slowly, like old thoughts turning in sleep. You enter Eridu as if entering a dream of origins. The air is low and warm. The marshlands breathe nearby, spreading the smell of the reeds, water, fish, mud, and salt. The city does not appear grand in the way later empires will appear. With vast stone reliefs and armies carved in procession, its power is quieter. It rests in age, in tradition, in the feeling that something here was already old when other cities began telling their own stories. Eridu held a special place in Mesopotamian memory. It was associated with Enki, the god of wisdom, fresh water, craft, and hidden knowledge, known in Akkadian as Ea. Archaeology has revealed long sequences of temple building at Eridu, with sacred structures layered across time. This layering gives the site a strange physical poetry. The sacred place is not one building, but many buildings occupying the same spiritual center again and again. You stand where one temple might have replaced another. Beneath your feet, there may be older floors, older offerings, older bricks, older gestures. Each generation comes believing it is renewing what must not be lost. Each generation changes the place slightly. Repair becomes transformation. Devotion becomes accumulation. Memory becomes architecture. This is one of the most important things a city can do. It can make time vertical. You feel that vertical time at Uruk as well. Though the air there is different, it feels busier, more expansive, full of movement. Uruk is associated with some of the earliest large-scale urban development known to archaeology, and with the goddess Inanna, later linked to Ishtar, whose powers include love, war, kingship, and dangerous intensity. The city became a symbol of urban greatness, writing, monumental building, and mythic kingship. You walk through its imagined lanes while the sun burns white above the roofs. There are workshops, courtyards, storage rooms, temple spaces, and the sound of human density. Potters, weavers, traders, labourers, priests, scribes, children, animals, officials. Life presses close. The smell is stronger here. Wool, grain dust, smoke, bitumen, sweat, bread, and refuse drying in the heat. Civilization is not a clean word when you stand inside it. It is crowded. It breathes hard. It needs walls, drains, rules, and memory just to continue for another day. In such a city, myths do not feel decorative. They feel necessary. They help explain why this crowded human arrangement has meaning, why the temple stands at the center, why the ruler matters, why festivals interrupt labor, why the goddess can bless and devastate, why the city is not merely a pile of houses, but a charged place in the cosmic order. Then you move in thought toward Nippur. There, the atmosphere changes again. Nippur was associated with Enlil, a major god of authority, wind, command, and kingship. For long periods, Nippur held exceptional religious importance, even when political power belonged elsewhere. This matters because it shows that a city's memory did not depend only on armies or wealth. A sacred centre could shape legitimacy beyond its own walls. You can imagine pilgrims or officials entering Nippur with careful steps. The dust seems more formal here. The temple district carries the heavy quiet of a place where decisions are imagined to echo beyond ordinary life. Enlil's authority in Mesopotamian tradition was immense, and the city tied to him became part of how kings and states understood divine approval. A curious pattern appears when you let these cities stand side by side. Eridu remembers wisdom and deep waters. Uruk remembers urban power, writing, and dangerous divine brilliance. Nippur remembers authority, command, and sacred legitimacy. Her remembers the moon, kings, burials, trade, and long dynastic pride. Each city holds a different piece of the larger arrangement. None contains the whole message. This is where the mystery becomes less like a hidden object and more like a map with missing roads. If you search for one tablet that says, "Here is the final message of the Anunnaki," you will not find it. But if you move city by city, deity by deity, ritual by ritual, you begin to notice that each sacred center preserves one function of an older order: wisdom, power, fertility, death, kingship, water, sky, war, writing, time. The mainstream reading is that Sumerian city-states developed distinct religious identities tied to local patron deities, and that these identities were shaped by politics, economics, geography, and tradition. Cities competed, cooperated, absorbed one another's myths, and reshaped divine hierarchies across centuries. This is history, not fantasy. It is the slow work of culture, and yet some have wondered whether the distribution of divine roles across cities resembles the broken remains of a system once imagined as whole. Not a modern machine exactly, but a sacred network. Each city as a station, each god as a function, each temple as a node where human labour met divine authority. This is speculative, but it draws strength from the way Mesopotamian thought often linked cosmic order with civic space. You pause at a city gate in the evening. The gate is tall enough to make you lower your voice. Its bricks hold the day's heat. Shadows gather at its base. People pass through carrying baskets, jars, tools, and worries. A trader leads donkeys. A young mother balances a vessel. A guard watches without interest until someone unfamiliar approaches. Above the gate, birds settle for the night. A city gate is practical. It controls movement, it marks boundary, it protects and taxes, but it is also symbolic. To enter the city is to enter an ordered world. Outside is field, road, marsh, desert, danger, distance. Inside is law, kinship, temple, market, memory. The wall does not only keep enemies out, it tells people that this space has been claimed from uncertainty. Still, walls fail. Every Mesopotamian city knew this. Archaeology is full of destruction layers, rebuilding phases, abandoned quarters, shifted channels, and the stubborn evidence that no sacred centre remains untouched forever. Rivers moved, trade changed, armies came, soil tired, political fortunes rose and fell. A city could be beloved by its god in one hymn and lamented as abandoned in another. Scholars debate how to interpret the relationship between physical destruction and literary lament. When a text describes a city abandoned by its deity, does it reflect a specific historical disaster, a ritualized literary genre, theological reflection, or political grief shaped into poetry? Often it is difficult to separate them. The texts are emotional, not neutral. They make ruin meaningful. You walk through a ruined version of a city now, not completely ruined. That would be too simple. This is a place half alive, half remembering itself. A wall has collapsed at one corner, a temple court is still swept, a house has been rebuilt using older bricks. Children play beside fragments of something sacred they do not recognize. Life continues among remains. People do not always know they are living in history's debris. The unusual tidbit emerges here, quietly. Some ancient Mesopotamian traditions treated certain cities as existing in a kind of divine blueprint before their earthly appearance. The idea that temples or cities had heavenly prototypes, or that sacred plans were revealed, belongs to a broader ancient way of thinking about construction and legitimacy. To the cautious historian, this expresses theology and ritual authority. To the speculative mind, it can sound like the earthly cities were copies of a design older than humanity's memory. You look again at the map of cities in your mind. The final message, if imagined through them, may not be a farewell. It may be a distribution. No single place was allowed to hold everything. Wisdom in one city, authority in another, desire and war in another. Moonlit time in another, fresh water depth in another. Human beings had to travel, trade, copy, conquer, and translate to assemble even a partial picture. Perhaps this is why the record feels broken even when pieces survive. The message was never stored in one room. It was spread across a civilization. You climb a mound at dusk and look outward. The plain is wide. The rivers are hidden by distance, but you know they are there, moving through their channels, making and unmaking land. Smoke rises from settlements. The sky darkens from gold to violet. Somewhere, a temple lamp is being lit. Somewhere, a scribe is copying a city name that was already old to him. The cities remember too much, but not clearly. They remember through ritual, not explanation. They remember through rebuilding, not confession. They remember through divine names attached to brick, water, moonlight, grain, and power. And as night settles over the plain, you begin to sense that each city is like a tablet too large to hold in your hands. Its streets are lines, its temples are signs, its ruins are missing passages, its people are the brief voices that move across the surface before time presses them into silence. The ancient message remains scattered, but its shape becomes a little more visible. It says that no human world stands alone. Every city is built over an older one. Every law rests on a forgotten fear. Every temple points towards something absent. Every record preserves not only what was known, but what had already begun to disappear. The room is not a room at first. It is a feeling of enclosure beneath a sky too wide to measure, a circle of presence, a gathering of powers, the kind of place ancient texts sometimes suggest without fully describing, where gods are imagined not as lonely figures, but as members of an assembly, speaking, deciding, objecting, consenting, and shaping the fate of worlds. You stand at the edge of that imagined council in silence. There are no modern walls, no polished throne hall, only a vast dimness like the inside of a storm cloud, lit by distant fire and the pale gleam of stars. The air feels heavy with incense, wind, river mist, and the cold mineral scent of stone after nightfall. You cannot clearly see every figure. Some seem near, others impossibly far. Some belong to sky and storm, some to wisdom and deep water, some to fertility, war, death, judgment, or the hidden regions under the earth. This is not a literal reconstruction. It is the shape suggested by many Mesopotamian stories. where divine beings gather to decide what human beings cannot decide for themselves. Ancient Mesopotamian religion included the idea of a divine assembly, a council of gods whose decisions affected kingship, cities, destinies, and disasters. Different texts present different arrangements, and the hierarchy of gods shifts across time, language, city, and political setting. But the image of divine deliberation remains one of the most powerful structures in the tradition. You listen, though no clear words reach you yet. Perhaps that is fitting. In the human world, decisions often arrive without explanations. A flood comes, a king falls, a city rises, a child survives, a harvest fails. People search for reasons afterward, tracing events back to divine anger, neglected ritual, fate, impurity, political weakness, or the hidden will of powers above them. The council is the invisible place where meaning is imagined to begin. In some myths, the gods are not calm abstractions. They argue, they fear, they complain, they regret. They make plans and suffer consequences. This is one of the curious features of Mesopotamian divine storytelling. The gods are mighty, but not always serene. They belong to order, yet they can produce disorder. They establish systems, yet those systems strain. You can feel that strain in the imagined assembly. A murmur moves through the divine figures like wind through reeds. Humanity is present in the discussion. Though no human stands at the centre, humans are below, in cities, fields, houses, and boats, grinding grain, clearing canals, copying tablets, bearing children, burying parents, feeding temples, watching skies. Yet the question of humanity rises upward. What are these clay-born beings becoming? Are they servants, witnesses, disturbances, caretakers, mistakes, necessities, or something no decree can fully contain? The mainstream historical reading would treat such scenes as theology and myth, ways of expressing cosmic order, social tension, and the relationship between human institutions and sacred authority. A divine assembly can mirror a human court, a royal council, or an elite gathering where decisions are made above the heads of ordinary people. The structure makes divine power understandable through social forms familiar to the culture, but myth can also turn that mirror around. If human councils resemble divine councils, then earthly authority appears to imitate heaven. If divine councils resemble human councils, then heaven itself begins to feel strangely political. Power, even in the sky, must be negotiated. That thought is quietly unsettling. You look across the gathering and sense the Anunnaki not as simple visitors or single characters, but as part of this larger world of divine authority. In many texts, their identity is fluid, sometimes associated with major gods, sometimes with underworld powers, sometimes with divine collectives involved in judgment or fate. They are not easy to pin down. Their very ambiguity may explain why later imagination has returned to them again and again. A precise figure can be explained. A shifting group becomes a doorway. Some speculative readers have imagined a final assembly of the Anunnaki as the moment when the great powers chose to withdraw, leaving humanity with instructions, warnings, or unfinished obligations. This is not something the ancient texts state clearly as a historical event. It is a modern imaginative reconstruction built from fragments, divine councils, creation myths, flood warnings, decrees of fate, and the gradual distance of divine voices. Still, as a narrative possibility, it reveals something important about how the records feel. They often suggest that human life is shaped by decisions made elsewhere. You step closer. The floor beneath you feels like smooth, dark clay, damp in places, as if the council chamber has risen from the marsh itself. Above, stars burn in patterns no one has yet turned into formal astronomy, though watchers in temples will one day connect heavenly movements with omens and royal fate. Around the circle, voices deepen. One voice may speak for order, one for mercy. one for necessity, one for silence, one for the old law that beings made for labour must remain within their assigned role, one for the dangerous truth that no living being remains forever inside the shape intended for it. The ancient records rarely give you modern psychological explanations. They do not pause to tell you what a god truly felt, what a council member secretly feared, or why a decree took one form and not another. They are concise, formal, sometimes broken, sometimes repetitive, often strange. This leaves space around them. The space invites careful interpretation, and sometimes dangerous over-interpretation. Scholars remain divided on many details of divine hierarchy and mythic development. Which traditions are older? Which are local? Which are products of scribal schools? How did Sumerian ideas change when translated into Akkadian? How did political shifts reshape divine prominence? The council you imagine is therefore not one fixed scene, but a composite shadow cast by many texts. Still, the shadow has form. It shows a universe where power speaks before humanity hears. The curious fringe tidbit here is not a flying craft or a hidden chamber, but something more subtle. Some modern readers see in these divine assemblies the ancient memory of administrative command structures, as if myth preserved the image of planners organizing human civilization from above. This remains speculative, and it can easily impose modern categories onto ancient religion. Yet it is easy to see why the idea tempts people. The gods deliberate like governors. They assign roles. They manage labour. They distribute authority. They send warning through chosen intermediaries. They withdraw favour when systems fail. The divine world behaves, at times, like an unseen administration of reality. You stand still as the council grows quieter. Perhaps the decision has already been made. Perhaps humanity will not be destroyed, but neither will it be fully trusted. Perhaps knowledge will be allowed, but limited. Kingship will be given, but made temporary. Ritual will preserve contact, but never complete closeness. Dreams will carry messages, but not certainty. Omens will hint, but not explain. Tablets will survive, but broken. This is where the final message begins to feel less like a gift and more like a boundary. Human beings may remember, but not completely. They may build, but not permanently. They may rule, but not forever. They may approach the divine, but not possess it. They may receive knowledge, but not escape consequence. That kind of message would not need to be carved in one line. It would be built into the conditions of human life as the ancient records imagined it. It would appear wherever power is granted with limits, wherever wisdom arrives with danger, wherever survival follows catastrophe but does not restore innocence. You hear a final sound in the council, perhaps a staff striking the ground, perhaps thunder beyond the horizon, perhaps only a clay tablet being set upon a table in some distant scribble room. The sound is small and enormous at once. Then the assembly begins to fade. The figures do not disappear suddenly. They become less distinct, as if distance is entering them. Their voices turn into wind. Their outlines become star, smoke, and shadow. You feel no triumph, no revelation strong enough to solve the whole mystery. Only the sober impression that ancient people imagined existence as something decided beyond human reach, and then handed down in fragments too heavy for any one generation to carry. When you return in thought to the city, the night is ordinary again. A lamp burns near a doorway, a pot cools beside a wall, a scribe sleeps with clay dust still beneath his fingernails, a ruler dreams of enemies, a mother wakes to check a child's breathing. The river moves unseen beyond the dark houses. Above them all, the heavens are silent, but the silence does not feel empty. It feels like the pause after a decision. The message does not look like a message at first. It looks like a bowl of grain carried at dawn. It looks like oil poured carefully into a vessel. It looks like a priest washing his hands before entering a dim room where the air is thick with smoke and stillness. You stand near the threshold of a temple chamber while the city outside slowly wakes. The morning has not yet become hot. The bricks are cool beneath your feet. A faint sweetness of incense hangs in the doorway, mixed with the sharper smell of ash, wool, and lamp oil. Somewhere inside, a divine statue waits in shadow, not as an object to the people who serve it, but as the earthly presence of a power whose true form remains beyond ordinary sight. The ritual begins quietly. No one explains it to you. No one turns toward you with a lecture. The meaning is carried by repetition, by gestures learned from those who learned from others, by words spoken in a voice shaped more by duty than emotion. A vessel is lifted, bread is set down, water is offered. A garment may be adjusted, a surface may be purified, a song may be sung, low and measured. Its words old enough that even some of those who speak them may feel they are stepping into a current deeper than understanding. This is a grounded part of ancient Mesopotamian religion. Temples were not empty monuments. They housed divine statues, received offerings, organized personnel, stored goods, and maintained ritual life. The care of the god's image was treated with extraordinary seriousness. Feeding, clothing, purifying, and honoring the divine presence were not symbolic decorations around belief. They were actions through which the relationship between city and god was kept alive. But you begin to wonder whether ritual is more than service. Perhaps ritual is memory disguised as action. A written message can break. A spoken message can be forgotten. A carved inscription can be destroyed by fire, conquest, salt, neglect, or time. But a ritual, repeated every day, can carry meaning forward even when the meaning becomes difficult to explain. It can preserve the outline of an older idea through movement. It can keep a warning alive inside a habit. The unusual thought enters softly. Some have wondered whether ancient rituals may preserve fragments of knowledge older than the texts that describe them. Not secret technology, not a simple hidden code, but patterns of behavior that outlive their explanations. Wash before entering. Feed the god, speak the name correctly, place the offering in order, mark the day, watch the sign. Repair what is damaged. Do not let the sacred house fall silent. In a cautious historical reading, such rituals bind community, hierarchy, economy, and theology. They organize labor, they display authority, they reinforce the importance of temple institutions. They give shape to anxiety in a world where drought, disease, war, and failed crops are always near. Yet even this cautious reading does not flatten the mystery. It only deepens it. A ritual can be both social order and sacred memory. It can be both political and intimate. It can be both practical and strange. You follow the movement of hands. The priest does not hurry. The vessel is held at the proper angle. The offering is placed where it belongs. A mistake may matter. The world of ritual is a world where order must be exact because disorder is always pressing at the edge. The canal can break. The city can fall. The body can sicken. The king can fail. The god can withdraw. Every correct gesture becomes a small repair against collapse. This is where the possible final message begins to take a different form. If the Anunnaki or the great divine powers of Mesopotamian imagination left anything behind, perhaps it was not a sentence to be read once, but a discipline to be repeated. The message may have said, maintain the bond. Remember the order. Do not let the visible world forget the invisible structure beneath it. It may also have said something more unsettling. Do not assume presence is permanent. The divine statue stands in the chamber, but its presence must be tended. The temple stands in the city, but its walls must be rebuilt. The hymn exists, but it must be sung. The calendar exists, but it must be watched. The offering exists, but it must be brought again tomorrow. Nothing sacred survives by existing once. It survives through care. You step into a courtyard where temple workers are already moving goods. Barley sacks, jars of oil, wool, animals, baskets, tablets. The ritual world is not separate from economy. Offerings require fields. Fields require labour. Labour requires rations. Rations require records. Records require scribes. Scribes require schools. Schools require tradition. Tradition requires belief that what is being preserved matters. The message is hidden in the chain. A hymn may praise the god, but the grain that feeds the ritual passes through human hands. A calendar may mark sacred time, but someone must observe the moon. A temple may claim cosmic importance, but someone must patch its roof after rain. Divine order depends, in practice, on human maintenance, on human. That dependence is quietly profound. If humans were created to serve the gods, then humans also keep the gods present in the world of memory. Without offerings, the relationship weakens. Without names, the gods fade from speech. Without tablets, their stories drift into silence. The servant becomes caretaker of the master's image. The created being becomes guardian of the creator's trace. Scholars continue to debate how people in different social positions experience temple ritual. The surviving texts are often elite, scribal, or institutional. They tell us much about formal worship, less about the inner life of the ordinary woman grinding grain, the shepherd at the edge of the city, the labourer repairing a wall, or the child watching smoke rise from the temple roof. Did ritual feel like devotion, obligation, fear, civic identity, routine, or hope? Probably many things at once. The tablets do not let you hear every private thought, so you listen to the objects instead: a bronze knife laid aside after use, a reed basket darkened by oil, a doorway polished by many hands, a clay tablet listing offerings, rinsed clean and set upright, a hymn line repeated until the words become part of the room. Objects remember through wear. Ritual remembers through repetition. In the afternoon, a festival begins to gather. The city changes tempo. People move toward public spaces. Music appears in fragments: drum, string, voice, then vanishes behind walls. The smell of cooking thickens. Children become restless. Officials look more anxious than joyful, because sacred celebration also requires control. The god must be honoured correctly. The crowd must move properly. The city must show itself ordered before the divine gaze. The calendar itself becomes a container of memory. Ancient Mesopotamian communities used lunar calendars and ritual schedules to coordinate religious and civic life. Months, festivals, offerings, and omens tied human activity to heavenly cycles. Time was not an empty line. It was patterned, charged, watched. The sky and the temple spoke to each other through schedule and sign. Some have wondered whether the final message could be hidden in timekeeping. Watch the cycles, notice return. Understand that power rises and falls, that cities are renewed and ruined, that flood follows dryness, that kingship moves, that memory weakens unless restored. This is speculative, yet it harmonizes with the ancient world's deep concern for repetition. What matters returns. What is ignored decays. By evening, the temple chamber is quieter again. The offerings have been made, the vessels have been cleaned, the courtyard dust has settled under many feet. A faint line of smoke still rises from a lamp. The divine image remains in shadow, unreadable. It gives no final answer. It does not lean forward and reveal the hidden sentence that would end all uncertainty. Instead, the ritual waits to be repeated. That waiting may be the message. You realize that ancient records do not preserve meaning only through words. They preserve it through instructions, duties, schedules, offerings, gestures, and sacred habits. A broken tablet may tell you that something was done, but the ritual tells you why repetition mattered. It tells you that the world was not considered stable on its own. It had to be renewed through care. Outside, night lowers gently over the city. The river is dark. The roofs are quiet. A dog moves through an alley and disappears. In a house near the temple wall, a worker sleeps with sore hands. In another room, a scribe places a tablet where it can dry safely. Above them, the moon rises, pale and deliberate, measuring time without speaking. The final message remains hidden, but you can feel its outline in the cooled air. Remember through action, guard what you do not fully understand. Repeat what keeps the world from falling silent, and know that a sacred order neglected long enough becomes indistinguishable from ruin. The thought arrives quietly, almost too quietly to disturb the room. What if humanity was not imagined as the first attempt? You do not hear the question spoken aloud. It forms slowly as you sit beside a low lamp in a scribal chamber where the walls are warm from the day and the night air smells of wax smoke, dust, and dry clay. A tablet rests on a reed mat before you. Its lines are incomplete. Its surface is worn by time. But the story it carries feels older than the copy itself, older than the hand that shaped it, older even than the school that taught the hand where each sign belonged. In Mesopotamian creation traditions, humanity does not always enter the world with the bright certainty found in later theological systems. The details vary from text to text. In some stories, humans are fashioned to relieve divine labour. In others, creation emerges through conflict, craft, speech, clay, blood, wisdom, or decree. There is no single, simple origin story that covers the whole tradition without remainder. Instead, there are layers, voices, cities, languages, and scribal inheritances, each preserving a different angle of the question. Why are we here? You lean closer to the tablet. The lamp flame trembles. The marks on the clay seem to deepen. A god may be planning. Another may be protesting. A material may be chosen. A body may be formed. A role may be assigned. The story is not a modern scientific account, and it should not be treated as one. It belongs to mythic imagination, to ritual thought, to a world where clay, divine will, social order, and human suffering all speak to one another. Still, the effect is unsettling. Humanity sometimes appears not as the first stream of the divine mind, but as an answer to a problem that already existed. Before the human worker, there is labour. Before the human city, there is divine need. Before the human role, there is an arrangement under strain. That means humans arrive into a story already in motion. You imagine an older world, not as a firm historical claim, but as a shadow within myth, a world of divine workers, lesser gods, cosmic tasks, tired hands, complaints rising like smoke, a world where creation has begun, but something in the system is not yet stable. The gods have their own burdens. The structure is too heavy. A new being must be made to carry what others no longer wish to bear. In a mainstream historical reading, this reflects social experience. Ancient people lived in highly organized labor systems, where work, hierarchy, and obligation shaped daily existence. Myths projected those realities into divine space. If humans spent their lives maintaining fields, canals, temples, and households, then creation stories could explain that labor as part of the original design. The myth gives cosmic meaning to social necessity, but one reading of the pattern feels stranger. If humans are created after another order has already become strained, then humanity is a second solution, a revision, an adjustment. Not necessarily a second biological species, not a literal discarded race, not a hidden laboratory in the modern sense, but a mythic second attempt at balance. The world required a new kind of being, one low enough to labour, yet intelligent enough to understand instruction, made of clay, yet capable of memory, bound to service, yet able to speak to gods, mortal, yet dangerous because mortals can multiply, remember, and question. This is where some speculative readers have gone further, imagining that ancient creation stories preserve a distorted memory of human alteration or guided emergence. Such readings are not accepted as evidence by mainstream scholarship, and they often place modern ideas onto ancient texts. Yet the fascination is understandable. The stories do describe making, assigning, and managing humanity. They speak in the language of purpose. They do not present human life as accidental. You leave the chamber and walk into the sleeping city. The moon has risen. Its pale light lies across the roofs like fine ash. In the alleys, the air is cooler. Somewhere a child coughs. Somewhere a jar clicks softly as it settles. The temple walls stand dark, enormous, holding within them the memory of offerings, songs, and divine statues. Beyond the city, fields rest under night, waiting for water, labour, and sun. You think of the human body in this world, feet hardened by dust, hands cracked by mud and grain, eyes trained to read signs in clay and sky, shoulders bent beneath baskets, mouth speaking names of gods, ears listening for commands, warnings, prayers, and rumours if humans were a second attempt. The attempt was astonishingly fragile. The body tires quickly, it hungers, it sickens, it fears, it dies. A being designed for labour is also a being vulnerable to the very world it must maintain. The canal worker can drown in the canal. The scribe can go blind in the dimness. The king can fall to fever. The priest can misread an omen. The mother can lose the child she prayed would live. And yet this fragile being does something no simple servant should be able to do. It turns experience into story. You stop at the doorway of a house. Inside, a family sleeps close together. Their breathing is uneven, human, ordinary. No great cosmic system is visible in that room. There is only rest, warmth, discomfort, and the need to wake again. But in the morning, someone from such a house may carry offerings. Someone may shape bricks. Someone may learn signs. Someone may remember a myth. Someone may ask a question that the system did not create merely to be asked. Scholars continue to debate how much weight should be placed on variations between Mesopotamian creation accounts. Are differences evidence of regional traditions, theological development, scribal creativity, or shifting political needs? When later Akkadian texts adapt older Sumerian themes, how much continuity should be assumed? The uncertainty matters. It prevents the stories from becoming one clean doctrine. They are more like overlapping reflections in disturbed water. This makes the idea of a final message even more elusive. If humanity's origin is told in several forms, then the message cannot depend on one version alone. It must be sought in recurring patterns: work, clay, divine planning, complaint, creation, obligation, mortality, and the uneasy closeness between servant and sacred power. Perhaps the message says that humans were made useful. Perhaps it also says that usefulness is never the whole truth of a living being. Perhaps it says that the powers who shaped the system underestimated the depth of memory in clay. The curious fringe tidbit deepens here. In some later esoteric and speculative traditions inspired by Mesopotamian material, the gods' creation of humans has been read almost like a lost account of engineering. But ancient mythic language is not technical language. Clay is symbolic, ritual, environmental, and poetic, blood or divine substance, where it appears in related traditions, speaks to life, kinship, guilt, and sacred force. To read such images only as machinery is to flatten them. To dismiss their strangeness entirely is also to lose something, so you let the images remain layered. Clay as earth, clay as body, clay as tablet, clay as memory, clay as the material from which a city rises and into which it falls. In that layering, humanity becomes a strange creature indeed, made from the same substance as walls and records, yet filled with breath, created to serve, yet able to preserve the names of those served, placed below the gods, yet able to imagine the gods, fear them, argue with them, and eventually live in a world where their voices grow distant. You walk toward the edge of the city. The fields beyond are silver under the moon. Irrigation channels glimmer faintly. Frogs call from wet places. The sky is vast, and the stars seem older than every temple. A wind moves through dry reeds with a sound like a whispered language just beyond recognition. Maybe the first attempt, if there was one in the mythic imagination, was not a creature at all. Maybe it was a system that failed to hold, a divine labour order that became too heavy, a world too unstable without human hands, a sacred arrangement that required a being capable of both obedience and adaptation. And maybe the second attempt was dangerous for exactly that reason. Humans adapt. They learn, they copy, they misunderstand creatively. They carry rituals forward after meanings fade. They build cities over older cities and call the result continuity. They inherit commands and turn them into questions. You feel the quiet unease of this as the night deepens. A servant who remembers too much may become a historian. A worker who writes may become a witness. A created being that tells stories may one day tell the story of its creators differently than they intended. If the Anunnaki, as remembered divine powers within the ancient imagination, left a warning hidden in the records, perhaps part of it concerns this unstable gift. To make humanity was to create continuity, but also unpredictability. To give humans labour was to give them contact with the world. To give them ritual was to give them repetition. To give them writing was to give them a way to outlast command. The lamp in the scribal chamber burns low. The tablet waits in silence. Its broken lines do not tell you whether humanity was truly a second creation. They do not settle the question. They offer images, roles, materials, and tensions. They leave you with the feeling that ancient people understood something modern people often forget. Beginnings are rarely pure. They are compromises. They are repairs. They are answers to pressures already hidden in the dark. Outside, the city sleeps under the moon, made of clay, filled with breath, held together by labour and story. And somewhere in that fragile mixture, the second attempt keeps dreaming beyond its assigned purpose. The first sign of distance is not silence. It is interpretation. You begin in the hour before dawn, when the city is neither asleep nor awake. The air is cool enough to touch the skin gently. A lamp burns low inside a small room, and its smoke gathers near the ceiling before slipping through a gap in the reeds. Somewhere outside, a donkey shifts its weight. Farther away, a watchman coughs. The river is unseen, but you can sense its presence by the dampness in the air. On the floor before you lies a tablet of omens, not a story of creation, not a hymn, not a king list. Something stranger in its patience, signs arranged with possible meanings. The world turned into a language that must be read carefully, a liver's markings, a dream, a birth anomaly, a pattern in oil, a movement of stars, a strange sound in the night, a crack in a wall, a behaviour of birds. The ancient world is full of messages, but fewer and fewer of them arrive as direct speech. That's the shift you begin to notice. In the older mythic atmosphere, gods may speak, command, argue, warn, and appear in ways that feel immediate. But much of Mesopotamian religious life, especially as preserved through scholarly traditions, becomes a world of signs. The divine will is not always heard plainly. It is sought, inferred, decoded, and debated. The gods do not vanish, exactly. They become harder to reach without specialists. This is a grounded detail of Mesopotamian culture. Divination held an important place in ancient Mesopotamia. Scholars and ritual experts studied omens, dreams, celestial events, extispicy, and other signs as possible communications from the divine world. Large omen series were copied and preserved, reflecting a deep belief that the universe was meaningful and that trained readers could sometimes interpret its warnings. You sit beside the omen tablet and feel its weight. It does not comfort easily. It suggests that the world is speaking, but not in a voice everyone can understand. It suggests that every event may contain a second layer. A king's decision might depend on a sign read by an expert. A city's anxiety might gather around an eclipse. A dream might be carried to someone who knows how to weigh its images. The divine voice has not disappeared. It has become indirect. You step outside as dawn begins to pale the roofs. The city is grey and blue, not yet gold. At this hour, every shape looks uncertain. A doorway might be a mouth. A reed shadow might be writing. A bird crossing the sky might mean nothing. Or something, depending on who sees it and when. The world seems calm, but beneath calm is a habit of watching. Perhaps this is how divine distance feels. Not abandonment all at once, but a change in access. You no longer hear the command directly. You look for traces. You no longer receive the warning plainly. You consult signs. You no longer stand before the power itself. You stand before its effects, its residues, its patterns. Some have wondered whether this gradual movement from direct divine action to mediated signs preserves a cultural memory of withdrawal. In that speculative reading, the gods or great powers once stood closer to humanity, then retreated, leaving behind only systems of interpretation: ritual, omen, dream, star, and text. This is not a conclusion the evidence forces. It is a mood some readers feel in the records. The mainstream view would say that divination reflects a sophisticated religious and scholarly system, not necessarily a memory of literal divine departure. Yet the mood remains. A world of signs is a world after nearness. You walk through a lane where morning work has begun. A woman pours water into a jar and pauses to watch a bird settle on a roof. A child asks whether the bird is lucky. The woman smiles, perhaps amused, perhaps uneasy, and tells the child to hurry. Nearby, an older man mutters about a dream he had during the night. He remembers only part of it: a dark river, a door, a voice he could not understand. Dreams matter in such a world. They are private, but not always treated as merely personal. They can trouble a household. They can be brought to interpreters. They can be remembered as warnings, blessings, or disturbances. The sleeping mind becomes one of the places where the border between human and divine grows thin, and yet even dreams are unclear. They speak in images. They require reading. They may reveal, conceal, or mislead. The unusual tidbit here is gentle but persistent. In many ancient cultures, dreams were not just mental debris, but possible channels from gods, ancestors, or unseen powers. Some modern mystery traditions have taken this seriously in another way, imagining that dream contact could represent the fading remnants of a once more direct communication with non-human intelligences. That idea belongs to speculation, but it echoes something real in the ancient atmosphere. Dreams were treated as meaningful enough to preserve, examine, and fear. You continue toward a temple roof at nightfall, because this world of signs does not end with dreams. The sky is one of its largest tablets. You stand under stars while the city darkens below. The air is cooler now, carrying the smell of roof dust, lamp smoke, and distant water. Above you, the heavens are not empty, they move. The moon changes shape. Planets wander. Stars rise and set in patterns. Eclipses terrify. Unusual celestial events can become politically and ritually charged. The sky does not shout, but it keeps returning with order, and order invites interpretation. Ancient Mesopotamian scholars developed extensive celestial omen traditions, and later Babylonian astronomy became highly sophisticated in observation and prediction. This does not mean every early Sumerian watcher held the same later system, but the broader Mesopotamian concern with the sky as meaningful is unmistakable. The heavens were not merely beautiful. They were legible, if one had training, patience, and inherited lists. You look upward until your neck aches. The stars are cold points above the warm city. You can almost understand why a distant god would choose them as writing. Clay breaks, kings lie, cities burn, but the stars return. They seem beyond human damage. If the gods withdraw into signs, the sky becomes their widest surviving script. Still, scholars debate how to trace the development from early religious sky-watching to later systematic astronomy and astrology. The evidence spans centuries and cultures. It is easy to compress the timeline too much, to imagine one continuous system where there were actually many stages. The uncertainty matters. It reminds you that ancient knowledge did not arrive fully formed. It accumulated, changed, and sometimes reinterpreted older practices through newer frameworks. This is how distance thickens. A direct voice becomes omen. Omen becomes series. Series becomes scholarship. Scholarship becomes tradition. Tradition becomes authority. Authority becomes something people trust because the original voice is no longer available. You sit beside a diviner in a dim room. He's not a magician in the childish sense. He's a trained reader of inherited patterns. His work requires memory, method, and seriousness. Before him lies an object to be interpreted. Perhaps a liver model. Perhaps an omen tablet. Perhaps a report of a dream. He compares, recalls, weighs possibilities. The divine message does not arrive whole. It must be reconstructed. The act resembles the way modern readers approach ancient tablets. You also interpret fragments. You also weigh signs. You also ask whether a broken line means one thing or another. You also stand at a distance from the original voice. In this way, the ancient system repeats itself through you. The gods became distant to them, and the ancients have become distant to you. You read their signs as they read the signs of heaven. This parallel feels almost like part of the hidden message. Every age receives the past indirectly. Every message weakens as it travels, yet sometimes gains depth from the journey. Every interpreter risks mistaking silence for permission to invent, and every fragment asks for humility. The possible final message of the Anunnaki, imagined through this fading of direct voices, might be a warning about mediation. Once the source withdraws, systems remain, priests remain, scribes remain, kings remain, interpreters remain. But all of them can err. They can preserve truth, distort it, weaponize it, soften it, or forget why it mattered. A sign is powerful, but only if read with care. A ritual is sacred, but only if not emptied by ambition. A king may claim divine favour, but a claim is not the same as presence. The city below grows quiet. Only a few lamps still burn. Their points of light mirror the stars in a small, trembling way. Somewhere, a child dreams. Somewhere, an old woman wakes and listens to the wind. Somewhere, a scholar copies an omen line from a damaged tablet, trusting that the old pattern still matters. You feel the sadness of a world learning to live after direct speech. It has not lost the divine completely. It has inherited traces. It has signs, dreams, skies, rituals, names, and clay. But traces require longing. They require the ache of not knowing fully. They require the patience to listen when nothing answers in a human voice. Perhaps the gods did not leave. Perhaps humans simply learned to hear them differently. Or perhaps distance entered the world so slowly that no one noticed until every message needed an interpreter. The dawn will come again. A bird will cross the roofline. A dream will fade before it can be spoken. A tablet will crack. A star will rise where it rose long ago. And someone will ask what it means. The stairs are narrow beneath your feet. They rise in slow, uneven turns toward the roof of the temple, where the night waits with a silence deeper than the streets below. Your hand brushes rough plaster. The wall still holds the last warmth of the day. Somewhere behind you, far down in the courtyard, a lamp is being covered against the wind. The smell of smoke follows you upward, thinning as you climb. At the top, the world opens. The city lies below in dark blocks and soft lamp glow. Roofs flatten into shadow. Courtyards become hidden squares. Alleys become black threads. Beyond the wall, fields stretch into a darker plain, and farther still, the river moves unseen beneath the night. Above everything, the sky has gathered itself into a vast field of stars. Here, you understand why the heavens were never merely scenery. For ancient Mesopotamian watchers, the sky was order made visible. The moon changed and returned. Planets wandered with strange purpose. Stars rose in seasons. Eclipses arrived like interruptions in the cosmic rhythm. The heavens seemed remote, but not meaningless. They offered patterns that outlasted kings, floods, walls, and voices You stand on the temple roof and breathe slowly. The air smells of dust, cooled brick, lamp oil, and the faint wetness rising from distant canals. A priest, scholar, or trained observer stands nearby, wrapped against the night breeze. He does not speak loudly. There is no need. His attention is fixed above. He knows that watching is a form of devotion, but also a form of record-keeping. The sky must be remembered carefully, because what returns can be compared with what came before. Mesopotamian civilization became famous for its long tradition of celestial observation and omen interpretation. Later, Babylonian scholars developed advanced astronomical records and mathematical methods, but the roots of sky watching reached deeply into the older religious imagination of the region. The heavens were tied to divine signs, calendars, ritual timing, royal fate, and the anxious hope that patterns might reveal what human beings could not see directly. The moon rises. It's not yet full. Its pale edge appears over the horizon, lifting slowly as if drawn by an invisible hand. The city below changes under its light. Mud brick walls become silver. Roofs become quiet platforms. A dog crosses an alley and vanishes. Somewhere, a baby cries once, then settles. The moon belongs to Nana in Sumerian tradition, later known as Sin in Akkadian, especially associated with Ur and Haran in different periods. Its cycle gave time a visible body. Month by month, it disappeared, returned, filled, emptied, and began again. A lunar calendar is not simply a tool. It is a way of living inside repetition. The people below may not know every calculation. They may not read complex omen series, but their festivals, work, offerings, and expectations are touched by the sky's rhythm. Time does not feel empty. It has faces. It has phases. It has dangerous nights and favourable days. It has moments when the human world must align itself with a larger order. You begin to see how the stars above the ziggurat could become part of the hidden message, not because they spell out a sentence in a simple way, not because every constellation hides a secret from forgotten gods, but because the sky teaches the same lesson again and again. Power moves in cycles. Light vanishes and returns. Order is visible only to those who watch patiently. Some speculative readers have imagined that the Anunnaki were linked to the heavens in ways more literal than ancient theology requires. They connect divine names, celestial bodies, and mythic descent with visitors from the sky. This is a modern fringe interpretation, not a conclusion supported by mainstream Assyriology or archaeology. Yet the reason such ideas take hold is understandable. Mesopotamian religion often places divine authority above, in a realm associated with heaven, stars, and cosmic order. When ancient texts speak of descent from heaven, later imaginations naturally look upward. The cautious reading is still richer. Heaven was not outer space in the modern sense. It was a sacred region of order and authority, a realm whose visible signs could be watched from earth. To say something came from heaven was to place it beyond ordinary human invention. It gave an institution, a destiny, or a warning a source higher than human argument. You look at the observer beside you. He holds a tablet, or perhaps a prepared surface for notes. He may record the position of the moon, the appearance of a planet, the timing of a strange light, the relation between a sign and an event. His work is patient, cumulative. He belongs to a tradition that trusts repetition. A single sign may trouble the night, but a series of records can become knowledge. Over generations, the sky becomes an archive. This is one of the open scholarly uncertainties that hovers over the ancient world. How exactly did early religious sky watching develop into the more technical astronomical traditions known from later Babylonia? The process was long, complex, and uneven. It involved temples, scribal schools, omen texts, mathematics, calendars, and royal concerns. It is tempting to imagine a straight line from myth to science, but the real path is more intricate. Observation, belief, prediction, and ritual did not separate neatly. On the roof, they are still together. A star is a light, a sign, a god's marker, a calendar point, a memory, a question. You feel your own breathing slow as the sky deepens. The longer you look, the more the stars seem to multiply. The darkness is not empty. It is crowded with order you cannot fully read. That feeling may be close to what ancient watchers felt, though filtered through a different mind and a different age. Awe, fear, discipline, and uncertainty all held together under the same night. Below, the city sleeps inside its fragile systems. Storehouses, walls, families, animals, tablets, tools, drains, altars, ovens. Human order is small from here. The stars make every city look temporary. Even the temple roof beneath your feet, massive in daylight, feels like a clay ledge beneath an immeasurable script. Perhaps this is why ziggurats and temple platforms have such imaginative force. Even when modern images sometimes exaggerate or simplify their form, they represent ascent, not escape from earth, but approach. A city raises a sacred structure upward, and a watcher climbs into thinner air, closer to the visible heavens. The building does not reach the gods. It confesses distance. That confession may itself be part of the message. The divine is approached, not possessed. The sky is read, not controlled. Patterns are observed, not commanded. Human beings may lift brick upon brick, but the stars remain beyond the hand. In a mythic sense, this distance protects mystery. In a political sense, it protects authority. In a spiritual sense, it teaches humility. The same sky that helps organize the calendar also reminds the ruler that his reign is brief. The same moon that marks festivals also shines on abandoned cities. The same stars that guide interpretation also watch the world before any tablet was written. Some have wondered whether a final Anunnaki message could be hidden in the heavens because the heavens outlast every earthly archive. Clay can break, libraries can burn, languages can die, but the cycles above return, indifferent and faithful. If a warning needed to survive beyond kings, perhaps it would be placed not in one object, but in rhythm. Observe the cycle, remember the fall, rebuild with care, and do not confuse height with permanence. The idea remains speculative, but it feels at home on the roof. A breeze moves across the platform. It carries the smell of dry reeds and far water. The observer shifts his weight. He marks something softly, perhaps only a note, perhaps a habit learned from teachers whose names he never knew. His stylus touches clay, and for a moment the sky above and the tablet below become reflections of one another. Points of light above, wedge marks below. Vast order translated into small human signs. You wonder if this is the most human act of all. To look at something too large to understand, then make a mark. The night grows colder. The city lamps vanish one by one. The moon climbs higher. A planet burns near the horizon, bright and steady, carrying a name and meaning that will shift across languages and centuries. The observer does not claim to know everything. He watches because not watching would be worse. Perhaps that is what the old records ask of you too. Watch carefully. Do not rush to certainty. Let pattern emerge slowly. Accept that some signs are real, some are imagined, and some cannot be separated cleanly after thousands of years. The sky gives no final answer. It does not open. It does not send a voice down the stair. It only continues its immense turning above the temple, patient beyond human need, and beneath it, on a roof of brick and dust, you stand between earth and heaven, feeling how small a city is, how brief a king is, how fragile a tablet is, and how strange it is that human beings, made of clay and breath, ever dared to read the stars. The warning does not arrive as thunder. It arrives as hesitation in the hand. You're sitting beside a scribe in the cool part of the morning, watching him prepare a tablet while the city slowly gathers heat outside. He has smoothed the clay carefully. He has trimmed its edges. He has chosen the reed stylus with the smallest split at the tip. Everything is ready for a line to be written, and yet he pauses. Perhaps he's waiting for the right wording. Perhaps he's remembering an older version. Perhaps he knows that some warnings become weaker when written too plainly. The room smells of wet clay, reed fibre, dust, and the faint sourness of yesterday's lamp smoke. Light enters through a high opening and falls across the scribe's wrist. His fingers are stained with earth. His eyes are calm, but not empty. He belongs to a profession that understands one quiet truth. Messages survive only when someone believes they are worth the labour of preservation. You lean toward the tablet and imagine the final message not as a sentence, but as a pattern built from many smaller warnings. Do not forget the order. Do not mistake power for ownership. Do not ignore the cycles. Do not let the sacred become empty habit. Do not think survival means innocence has returned. Do not believe that what was lowered from heaven cannot be lifted away. These lines are not found together in one ancient record. They are an interpretation, a soft reconstruction drawn from recurring themes in Mesopotamian tradition. Divine order, human labour, kingship, ritual duty, flood destruction, omen interpretation, and the fragility of cities. The historical record is much more complex than a single farewell. It is plural, damaged, local, and layered. But sometimes, when fragments are placed near one another, they begin to form the outline of an old caution. You step into a city that seems normal at first. Bread is being baked, grain is being measured, children run past a wall where older bricks have been reused in a newer structure. A potter turns clay with steady hands. A priest crosses a courtyard carrying a vessel. A ruler's official speaks with a canal overseer. Donkeys wait under flies. The day has no obvious sign of ending. Everything appears to continue. Warnings often live inside continuation. Ancient Mesopotamian texts were deeply concerned with maintaining order against chaos. This concern appears in royal inscriptions, ritual texts, omen literature, city laments, and myths. Kings present themselves as restorers. Priests preserve correct practice. Scribes copy inherited knowledge. Diviners search for signs of danger before danger becomes visible. The culture does not assume that order is automatic. It assumes order must be guarded. That assumption may be the heart of the warning. You walk beside the canal, where water moves slowly under a skin of reflected light. Men are clearing silt from the channel. Their bodies shine with sweat. One worker stops to stretch his back, then bends again. This labour may seem ordinary, but the city depends on it. If canals fail, fields suffer. If fields suffer, offerings diminish. If offerings diminish, temple life weakens. If temple life weakens, the sacred relationship trembles. A crack in mud can become a crack in meaning. The message, then, might not be mysterious because it is hidden. It might be mysterious because it is too ordinary to notice. Maintain what sustains you. Respect the systems you inherit. Remember that every great structure depends on small repeated acts. The unusual fringe tidbit enters from a different angle. Some modern interpreters imagine the Anunnaki leaving humanity with a warning about misuse of knowledge or the danger of becoming too powerful too quickly. They see echoes of a forbidden inheritance in myths of civilization gifts, divine decrees, and catastrophic resets. This is speculative, and it should remain clearly so. The tablets do not present a modern warning about technology or progress. Yet ancient stories often do worry about imbalance. They worry about noise, rebellion, pride, divine anger, failed kingship, broken rituals, and cities abandoned to ruin. Different age, similar unease. You pass a workshop where metal is being shaped. The sound is sharp against the morning. Copper or bronze catches light in small flashes. Nearby, a child watches with fascination as the craftsperson works. Tools change what humans can do. Writing changes what humans can remember. Kingship changes what humans can command. Ritual changes how humans relate to fear. Each gift carries consequence. Perhaps the warning no one could keep was not simply, "Obey the gods." Perhaps it was, "Do not forget that every gift has a shadow." Writing preserves memory, but it can also preserve power. Kingship organizes society, but it can also magnify ambition. Ritual stabilizes fear, but it can become hollow performance. Knowledge protects the city, but it can tempt the city to imagine itself beyond judgment. This is not a modern lecture placed into ancient mouths. It is a reflective reading of tensions already present in the records. The Mesopotamian world knew that kings could fail, cities could fall, omens could warn, and divine favour could depart. The stories do not present civilization as a steady climb into safety. They present it as a fragile order always at risk. Scholars debate how much of this should be read as religious worldview, political ideology, literary convention, or lived anxiety. A city lament may preserve memory of historical devastation, but it is also shaped by ritual language. A royal inscription may celebrate restoration, but also advertise authority. A myth may encode social realities while also belonging to sacred imagination. The uncertainty does not weaken the warning. It makes the warning more human. Warnings are often repeated because no one fully obeys them. You enter a palace court, or perhaps only an administrative building. The floor is swept. Seals are kept under watch. Messengers arrive dusty from the road. Reports come from fields, borderlands, temples, and storehouses. The people here believe they are managing the world. In a limited sense, they are. They count, command, organize, and respond. But beyond their tablets lie drought, flood, disease, invasion, succession crisis, divine displeasure, and the quiet erosion of human attention. No system sees everything. That may be another part of the hidden message. The ancient records often show human beings trying to know what is coming. They consult omens. They preserve precedents. They ask the gods. They study the stars. They rebuild after ruin, yet uncertainty remains. No archive removes vulnerability. No ritual guarantees control. No king, however favoured, holds the future tightly enough to stop it from changing shape. In the afternoon, heat presses down on the city. The streets empty slightly. Even animals seek shade. A fly circles a jar. The river smell grows stronger. In a small schoolroom, a student copies a line about an ancient king whose reign lasted beyond belief. He does not know whether to imagine the king as real, mythic, symbolic, or sacred. He copies because the line belongs to the tradition. The act is humble and yet immense. It keeps the question alive. A warning can survive even when its explanation is gone. Perhaps the original meaning of a myth is lost. Perhaps a ritual continues after its first purpose has faded. Perhaps a phrase like kingship lowered from heaven is repeated long after people disagree about what heaven means. The form remains. The content shifts. The warning becomes portable, but also vulnerable to misreading. You feel the sadness of that. The message could be everywhere and still be missed. It could be in the flood story, warning that civilization can be washed clean of its own arrogance. It could be in the king list, warning that power moves on. It could be in the creation of humans for labour, warning that usefulness is not the same as freedom. It could be in the Apkallu, warning that knowledge must be carried carefully across catastrophe. It could be in omens, warning that the world speaks indirectly when direct speech has faded. It could be in the stars, warning that cycles outlast every city beneath them. And still, people would forget, not because they are foolish, but because daily life is heavy. Bread must be made, children must be fed, debts must be settled, walls must be repaired. A person cannot live every moment inside cosmic caution. The warning becomes background, then tradition, then decoration, then puzzle. Even now, you may be doing what the ancients did, listening late, half awake, trying to hear a pattern in fragments. The scribe finally presses his stylus into the clay, one wedge, then another. A line begins. It may be an account, a hymn, a a copy of an older myth, or a note for a student. The content matters, but so does the act. The warning continues because the hand moves. The message is not complete, but it is not gone. Outside, the city shines under the afternoon sun, temporary and certain of itself. The canals glitter. The temple wall casts a narrow shade. A ruler's name dries on a brick. A child laughs near a doorway. A worker lifts another basket. And beneath all of it, almost too quiet to hear, the old warning waits for someone to notice that every world humans build is both shelter and test. The library does not burn all at once in your imagination. It begins with a sound. A beam gives way somewhere overhead, cracking like a dry bone. Dust falls from the ceiling in a pale curtain. A shelf leans. Tablets slide against one another with a dull, earthen clatter. Outside, there are shouts, feet, the harsh movement of people who have stopped caring what belonged to whom. The air tastes of smoke, plaster, fear, and clay. In a room meant for order, disorder enters. You stand among tablets stacked on shelves, stored in baskets, arranged by habit, topic, owner, or institution. Some are accounts, some are letters, some are school exercises, some are rituals, some contain hymns, myths, omens, royal claims, medical instructions, mathematical procedures, and words no one living in the room will ever have time to copy again. They are not all equally important, but time will not choose gently. The roof falls, fire changes the room. It destroys wood, reed, cloth, skin, and breath, but clay behaves differently. Some tablets, still raw or only partly dried, may harden in the heat. Destruction can accidentally preserve. This is one of the strange facts of archaeology. Disaster sometimes becomes an archivist. A room abandoned peacefully may lose everything to weather and reuse. A room burned suddenly may seal voices into the earth for thousands of years. You feel the sadness of that bargain. For the ancient people, the fire is catastrophe. For the future, it is evidence. This is a grounded truth of many archaeological discoveries in Mesopotamia and beyond. Archives, libraries, and tablet collections often survive because buildings collapsed. Cities were destroyed, or objects were buried and forgotten. The most famous later example is the library associated with Ashurbanipal at Nineveh, where thousands of tablets and fragments preserve literary and scholarly traditions, including copies of older Mesopotamian works. Although this library belongs to a much later Assyrian world rather than early Sumer, it shows how scribal inheritance moved through centuries, languages, empires, and ruins. Transmission is never clean. A Sumerian composition might be copied in old Babylonian schools. A myth might survive in fragments from different cities. A divine name might shift in another language. A text might be adapted, translated, excerpted, misunderstood, corrected, or preserved with reverence long after its earlier setting had changed. By the time a modern reader encounters it, the story may have passed through many hands, many rooms, many fires, and many silences. You walk through the broken archive after the noise has ended. Ash lies in soft drifts near the walls. The smell is bitter and dry. A tablet rests face down, its back cracked by heat. Another has shattered into pieces small enough to vanish underfoot. A seal impression survives on a lump of clay, still holding the mark of a person who once believed this record would matter for a season, not for 4,000 years. The final message, if hidden in the record, had to pass through this kind of damage. Not only one damage, many kinds. Language damage, when Sumerian gradually ceased to be a spoken everyday language and continued as a learned, liturgical, and scribal language. Meanings had to be taught rather than simply lived. A text preserved in a school can survive, but it survives differently from a story spoken around a household fire. Political damage. Cities rose and fell. Empires took older traditions and placed them in new frameworks. A myth that served one city's sacred identity could be reshaped when another city gained power. Material damage, clay breaks, Lines vanish, edges crumble, names disappear where a corner falls away. Interpretive damage. A later scribe may understand much, but not everything. A modern scholar may understand more grammar than an ancient copyist expected, yet still miss the atmosphere of ritual, fear, or humour that once surrounded the words. This is why the chain of transmission feels like a river carrying broken reflections. The water continues, but the image changes. A curious fringe thought appears here. Quiet but persistent. Some modern readers imagine that the deepest knowledge in Mesopotamian tradition was intentionally fragmented, hidden across myths, rituals, and city cults, so it could survive collapse without being easily seized. There is no firm evidence for a planned secret archive of Anunnaki messages in that sense. Yet ancient cultures did sometimes protect specialized knowledge through restricted priestly, scholarly, or ritual settings. Not everything was equally public. Some forms of learning belonged to trained experts, and secrecy itself could become a mark of sacred power. So the idea cannot be accepted whole, but it cannot be dismissed as meaningless either. The ancient world understood that knowledge has boundaries. You enter a scribal school in a calmer age. The walls are intact, the students are restless, the teacher is impatient, the tablets are damp and new. Here, transmission is not dramatic. It is slow, repetitive, and full of mistakes. A student copies a sign incorrectly. The teacher corrects him. Another recites a list of gods and forgets one name. A third smooths his tablet and begins again. The room smells of clay, sweat, and concentration. This is where survival really happens. Not in the heroic moment of rescue, but in the boring discipline of copying. A myth survives because a student practices it. A hymn survives because a priest needs it. An omen survives because a scholar trusts precedent. A king list survives because power wants memory to have form. A creation story survives because the question of human purpose refuses to disappear. Yet every act of copying is also an act of selection. Some texts are copied often. Others are neglected. Some are updated. Others become obscure. Some are broken and never restored. Some are preserved only because they were useful for training hands and minds. What reaches the future is not the whole past. It is the past filtered through institutions, accidents, tastes, politics, disasters, and the stubbornness of clay. Scholars continue to debate many details of this transmission. How old are the traditions behind surviving copies? How faithfully did scribes preserve earlier material? Which variations reflect local theology, scribal error, deliberate adaptation, or older oral forms? These questions matter because the answer changes how close you think you are standing to the original voice. Sometimes you are near, sometimes you're hearing an echo of an echo. You hold that uncertainty gently. The record is not false because it is transmitted. It is not simple because it survives. It is not complete because it is ancient. In the late afternoon, you imagine a caravan leaving one city for another. Tablets may not be the main cargo. There is wool, grain, metal, timber, stone, oil, cloth, and rumour. But words travel too. A story heard in one place is retold in another. A divine name is matched with another divine name. A ritual practice is adapted. A mythic theme crosses a linguistic border and returns changed. The message moves like this. Not straight, not pure, alive because it changes, wounded because it changes. If the Anunnaki's final message is a pattern hidden across the records, then it has passed through human weakness at every stage. Through ambition, through devotion, through forgetfulness, through conquest, through the pride of kings who wanted old stories to support new power, through scribes who preserved what they could and misunderstood what they inherited, through modern readers who bring their own hunger for lost origins. That may be the most important warning of all. Every receiver changes the message. Even you, as night falls over the ruined archive, the heat of the old fire is gone. The broken tablets lie in darkness. Some will never be found. Some will be found but never joined. Some will be translated in fragments. Some will sit in drawers, their signs studied by careful eyes under electric light in a world the scribes could never imagine. And still, through all that distance, something comes through. Not certainty, not a perfect farewell, a damaged inheritance, a sense that the ancient world tried to preserve the memory of order under threat, knowledge under burden, power under limits, and humanity under a sky that never explained itself fully. You place one fragment beside another. They do not fit, but their edges suggest a missing whole. The most powerful line is sometimes the one that is missing. You see it first as a break in the clay, a pale scar across the surface where the tablet has lost its edge. The signs move steadily for a while, each wedge pressed with care by a hand long gone. Then the sentence reaches the broken place and stops. Not because the ancient scribe stopped, not because the thought ended, only because the clay did. You lean closer. The lamp beside you burns low, its flame bending whenever the night wind slips through the doorway. The room smells of warm oil, dust, and dry earth. Around the fragment, other tablets lie wrapped in shadow, each carrying its own damaged silence. Some have lost their opening, some have lost their ending, some preserve names but not actions, some preserve actions but not reasons. In this room, history does not speak as a full voice, it breathes through cracks. This is the place where the tablets refuse to say enough. Ancient Mesopotamian records are vast compared with many other early civilizations, yet they are still incomplete. They survive unevenly, depending on excavation, destruction, preservation conditions, scribal copying, ancient selection, modern discovery, and accident. For every tablet that reaches a museum drawer, countless others have dissolved, shattered, remained buried, or were never written at all. What you call the record is not the whole world. It is the surviving shore of a drowned continent. That fact changes everything. When you ask what the Anunnaki's final message might have been, you're not reading a complete archive. You're listening through a wall with stones missing. The answer may not be absent because no one ever imagined it. It may be absent because the line broke, the room burned, the copy failed, the tradition changed, or the question itself belongs more to modern longing than ancient intention. You sit with that possibility. It is uncomfortable, but honest. The ancient texts do not offer a simple final statement from the Anunnaki. They offer divine counsels, creation themes, flood stories, king lists, hymns, rituals, omens, laments, and scholarly traditions. They offer patterns that can be interpreted. They offer moods that can be felt, but they do not hand you a sealed answer. Anyone who claims they do has likely stepped beyond the clay into desire. Yet desire is part of the story too. Why do you want the tablets to say more? Perhaps because a broken record feels like an invitation. A missing line becomes a doorway. You imagine what might have stood there. A warning, a name, a reason, a farewell, a confession. The mind dislikes incomplete shapes. It tries to close them. It reaches into the gap and returns with meaning. Scholars do something similar, but carefully. They compare duplicate manuscripts. They study grammar. They examine sign traces. They consult related texts and scribal conventions. Sometimes a missing sign can be restored with high confidence. Sometimes only several possibilities remain. Sometimes nothing responsible can be said. The discipline lies in knowing the difference. Speculation has its own rhythm. It asks what the fragments might imply if read together as a hidden pattern. It wonders whether myth preserves memory, whether ritual preserves warning, whether divine withdrawal preserves a sense of lost contact, whether kingship lowered from heaven is theology or something stranger. Speculation can be beautiful when it stays humble. It becomes dangerous when it pretends to be certainty. You move your finger near the broken edge without touching it. The clay has a texture like old skin. Tiny grains catch the light. A sign near the fracture may be only half present, just enough to suggest a sound but not enough to settle it. This is how uncertainty enters the body, not as an abstract problem, but as a missing corner you can almost feel. There is a mainstream historical detail woven into this silence. Many Sumerian literary works are known from copies made in the Old Babylonian period, long after the earliest phases of Sumerian urban civilization. This means that some compositions preserve older traditions through later scribal environments. The language may be old, the copies later, the ideas older still, and the transmission complex. You're rarely standing at the first moment of a story. You're standing at one of its surviving moments. That should make the record less certain. It also makes it more human. A story survives because people keep returning to it. The unusual fringe tidbit appears when modern interpreters treat damaged tablets as if their gaps must hide suppressed truths. Missing lines become, in their imagination, evidence of what someone did not want you to know. Sometimes this is simply fantasy. Tablets break because clay breaks. Archives vanish because time is harsh. But there is a subtler version of the idea that is worth holding gently. Absence shapes interpretation. What is missing can influence a tradition almost as much as what remains. A gap can become sacred, frightening, or magnetic. You see this in the way people speak of lost books, lost cities, lost gods, lost senses, lost warnings. Loss gives the past a shadow larger than itself. In the quiet of the tablet room, you begin to hear many kinds of refusal. The tablets refuse to tell you exactly how ordinary people felt when priests performed daily offerings. They refuse to tell you the first form of every myth before scribes reshaped it. They refuse to tell you whether an antediluvian king was remembered as symbol, ancestor, divine figure, or something in between. They refuse to tell you how much of a flood story came from lived catastrophe, theological imagination, or inherited motif. They refuse to tell you where mythology ends and cultural memory begins. They refuse to tell you whether the final message was ever a message at all. This refusal is not emptiness. It is an ethical boundary. It asks the listener not to steal certainty from the dead. You step outside into the night, carrying the question with you. The city is quiet. The moon has not yet risen. The sky is darker than usual, crowded with stars but offering no simple sign. A narrow lane opens between houses. The walls on either side are rough, and your shoulder brushes one of them as you pass. The clay is cool now. It gives nothing away. Gives. At a doorway, an old woman sits awake. Perhaps she cannot sleep. Perhaps she is waiting for someone. Perhaps she is simply enjoying the brief coolness before another day of heat. She knows stories no tablet will record. She knows births, quarrels, debts, jokes, recipes, fears, kindnesses, betrayals, songs, and private griefs. When she dies, most of that knowledge will vanish without leaving a mark. This is the greatest missing archive. Not the royal texts, not the temple hymns, the ordinary interior of human life. When modern people read ancient records, they often encounter institutions, kings, gods, temples, scribes, offerings, land, labour, omens. But the world was also full of people whose thoughts rarely entered clay. Their silence is not mysterious in the dramatic sense. It is simply the normal silence of the poor, the tired, the young, the enslaved, the busy, the untrained, the unrecorded. If humanity's role was described by elite texts as service, labour, ritual, and obedience, perhaps ordinary lives contained quieter interpretations. A mother may have prayed not because theology demanded it, but because her child had fever. A worker may have served the temple because rations depended on it. A young scribe may have copied a myth while thinking of food. A king may have claimed divine support while fearing revolt. Human meaning always leaks beyond official language. The records refuse to say all this plainly, but the silence points toward it. And perhaps the final message, if reconstructed from refusal, must include humility before what cannot be known. It may say, do not confuse the surviving record with the whole truth. It may say, do not turn fragments into idols. It may say, do not mistake your interpretation for the ancient voice itself. It may say, listen to what remains, but also honour what does not. A wind moves through the lane. Dust shifts at your feet. In the distance, the temple roofline cuts against the stars. The gods are not speaking. The tablets are not explaining. The city is not offering a conclusion. Yet the absence itself begins to feel instructive. Scholarly uncertainty is not failure here. It is the proper atmosphere of the subject. Experts continue to debate translation choices, dating, textual relationships, mythic development, divine classifications, and the meanings of damaged passages. These debates do not weaken the wonder. They protect it from becoming too easy. The broken tablet waits inside the room behind you. Its missing line remains missing. No responsible hand fills it entirely. No careful listener forces it to speak. And in that restraint, the ancient world becomes more alive, not less. It keeps its distance. It remains partly itself. It does not become only what you need it to be. You walk on through the sleeping city, sensing that the deepest secrets may not be hidden by priests, kings, or gods. They may be hidden by time itself, by the ordinary violence of weather, breakage, forgetting, and human mortality. The tablets refuse to say everything, but they say enough to leave you listening. You begin gathering the fragments without trying to force them into a perfect shape. A tablet about kingship, a myth about labour, a flood memory, a ritual instruction, a hymn to a temple, a list of sages, an omen line, a city lament, a broken edge where a sentence once continued. None of them alone gives you the final message. None of them says, plainly, this is what the Anunnaki left behind. But as you place them near one another in the quiet of imagination, their shadows begin to overlap. The room around you is dark except for a low lamp. Its flame is small, but it changes everything it touches. The clay fragments lie in amber light. Cracks deepen, wedges sharpen. Dust glows briefly, then disappears into the air. The smell is dry earth, oil smoke, and the faint bitterness of old ash. Outside, the city is sleeping. Or perhaps the city is only a memory of many cities. Eridu, Uruk, Nippur, and all the unnamed settlements that fed them, feared them, served them, and vanished beneath the plain. You do not need to solve the tablets. You need to listen to their pattern. A grounded historical pattern is already clear. Ancient Mesopotamian civilization was built around cities, temples, irrigation, scribal administration, divine kingship, ritual obligations, and long chains of textual transmission. Its records preserve a world in which human society was understood through sacred order. The gods were not decorative additions to life. They were woven into how people imagined authority, agriculture, time, kingship, calamity, and survival. That much stands on firmer ground. The mystery begins where the pattern becomes emotional. Why do these records so often feel as if humanity inherited a role rather than invented one? Why does knowledge seem transmitted from a sacred distance? Why does kingship descend rather than merely arise? Why does catastrophe divide time? Why do cities feel like earthly copies of a cosmic order they can never fully maintain? Perhaps the final message is not one hidden sentence. Perhaps it is the shape made by all these questions. You place the first fragment in your mind, humanity made for labour. It may reflect the hard social world of canal work, temple service, field production, and organised obligation. But it also carries a deeper unease. Human beings are useful to the divine order, yet they are not tools. They suffer, they remember, they speak, they write. They become the keepers of the very beings who once defined them. In that reversal, the servant becomes witness. You place the second fragment beside it, wisdom brought from before the flood. The Apkallu, the ancient sages, may be understood as mythic culture bringers or priestly ancestors of learned knowledge. Yet they also suggest that civilization depends on transmission from an earlier source, whether divine, ancestral, or symbolic. Knowledge is not casual. It is inherited under pressure. It comes with a responsibility. It can be lost. It can be misused. It can survive only if copied, taught, and guarded. The third fragment, Kingship lowered from heaven, here. The message becomes political and sacred at once. Power is granted but not owned. It descends, but it also moves. It legitimizes rulers, but it exposes them to judgment. No city holds it forever. No ruler can make divine favor permanent through inscription alone. The phrase carries grandeur, but also a warning hidden inside grandeur. What is lowered may be withdrawn. The fourth fragment, flood. Water erases boundaries, names, roads, fields, and walls. It turns the ordered world back toward undifferentiated mud. In historical reality, floods could devastate river communities. In myth, flood becomes the great division between worlds. It marks the failure or exhaustion of an earlier order. It says survival is possible, but never complete. Something is always left beneath the water. The fifth fragment, ritual, daily offerings, purifications, hymns, calendars, temple care. These are not dramatic in a modern sense, but they may be the strongest carriers of memory. A ritual says, repeat what matters, even when you no longer fully understand it. It says, the world is not stable unless tended. It says sacred presence must be cared for, and neglect is a quiet form of destruction. The sixth fragment, omens and stars. Divine speech becomes indirect. The world must be read. Dreams, eclipses, strange births, celestial movements, and signs in bodies or objects become possible messages. The gods, or the powers behind existence, do not always speak plainly. Human beings live in interpretation. They must learn humility because every sign can be misread. Now the fragments begin to form something like a circle. Labour, knowledge, power, catastrophe, ritual, interpretation. Inside that circle stands humanity, made of clay and breath, fragile, restless, obedient for a time, forgetful often, capable of devotion, ambition, tenderness, cruelty, memory obscene, and surprise. If the Anunnaki are understood as great divine powers within the Mesopotamian imagination, then a possible final message attributed to them in this slow reconstruction might be something like this. You are placed inside an order older than your memory, but the order will not maintain itself without you. Serve it blindly, and you become less than human. Ignore it completely, and your world cracks. Remember it carefully, and you may carry something forward, though never perfectly. This is not a quotation. It is not a translation. It is a reflective interpretation made from patterns, and it must remain gentle. The ancient record does not allow certainty here. Scholars continue to debate the meanings of the Anunnaki, the dating of traditions, the development of creation accounts, the relationship between Sumerian and later Mesopotamian texts, and the ways mythology relates to lived history. The Honest Listener does not cover these uncertainties with dramatic certainty. The Honest Listener lets them remain part of the sound. Still, there is a curious fringe thread that keeps glowing at the edge of the lamp. Some modern interpreters imagine the Anunnaki leaving humanity with a hidden warning about origin, power, and forgotten design. They imagine a message from beings who shaped the world and then withdrew, leaving only broken tablets and coded myths behind. As history, this goes far beyond the evidence. As a modern myth made from ancient material, it reveals something about the hunger these records awaken. People look at the oldest writing and want it to answer the oldest human fear, that we do not fully know why we are here. Perhaps that is the truest reason the story endures. Not because the tablets solve the mystery, but because they make the mystery feel ancient. You move the fragments again. This time, you do not arrange them as the evidence in a case. You arrange them like stones around a small fire. Each one gives off a little warmth. Each one holds part of the night back. You see the canal worker bending under the sun. You see the scribe copying names whose meanings are already older than him. You see the king standing before the temple, dressed in borrowed authority. You see the priest placing bread before a silent statue. You see the dreamer waking with an image he cannot explain. You see the flood survivor looking back at water where fields once lay. You see the city built over earlier floors, and earlier floors beneath those, and beneath them the patient earth. The final message, if it has any shape, is not only about gods. It is about inheritance. Every human world begins inside conditions it did not choose. Every generation receives systems, stories, duties, wounds, and warnings from those who came before. Some are wise, some are unjust, some are misunderstood, some must be repaired, some must be released, but none can be ignored without consequence. That may be why the Sumerian records feel so alive in the dark. They do not merely say that ancient people believed in divine order, they show how hard it is to live inside inherited order without becoming trapped by it or careless with it. They show that civilization is not only a triumph over chaos, it is a negotiation with memory. You look again at the clay. Clay is the perfect material for such a message. It is earth shaped by water and hand. It can become a wall, a bowl, a seal, a brick, a tablet, a figure, a ruin. It can carry a name longer than the mouth that spoke it. It can be broken and still speak. It can be buried and return. It can make a city and then hold the record of the city's fall. Perhaps the last shape of the record is clay remembering what humans forget. The lamp burns lower. The fragments no longer seem like puzzle pieces waiting for completion. They seem like survivors sitting together in silence. Their incompleteness is part of their truth. If they were complete, perhaps they would be easier to dismiss. Because they are broken, they keep asking to be approached carefully. You feel no need to close the question. A final message that could be fully solved would not belong to these tablets. It would be too clean, too modern, too eager to end the night. Instead, the message remains partial, like a voice heard through reeds, like a star seen through river mist, like a name on a tablet whose edge has crumbled away. It says enough to trouble the heart, but not enough to free it from wandering. And so you leave the fragments where they are, lit by the last weak flame, surrounded by dust, carrying the weight of cities, gods, workers, kings, and floods. The record is damaged. The meaning is unfinished, but the outline remains. Remember the order, question the order, tend what sustains life, and never believe that a world built by human hands is beyond falling back into clay. The sand is quiet now, not empty, not dead. Only quiet in the way very old places become quiet after the last human voice has moved away. It lies in shallow drifts against broken walls. It gathers inside roofless rooms. It softens the edges of fallen brick. It covers small things first, a bead, a seal, a shard of pottery, the corner of a tablet. Then larger things, streets, courtyards, thresholds, and the steps where feet once passed every morning. You stand at the edge of a ruined city beneath a sky fading toward evening. The sun is low, its light is amber and tired, spreading across the plain as if it too has become part of the dust. Nothing moves quickly here. A dry wind passes through the gaps in the walls. It carries the smell of mineral earth, sun-warmed clay, and distant reeds. Somewhere beyond the visible ruins, the river has changed its course, or perhaps only withdrawn far enough to leave memory behind. This is what remains when a city loses its daily argument with time. No market noise, no temple procession, no scribe correcting a student, no canal overseer shouting at workers, no ruler entering the courtyard with borrowed authority. Only forms, a wall line, a mound, a broken drain, a tablet fragment pressed into the soil. Archaeology begins in such quiet, but it does not end there. Excavators measure, map, record, compare, date, and interpret. They recover bricks, tablets, pottery, bones, tools, seals, and architecture. From such remains, they reconstruct parts of ancient life with patience and caution. The work is not a treasure hunt in the childish sense. It is a disciplined conversation with what survived. Still, even discipline cannot restore everything. A room may be identified, but not every conversation held inside it. A tablet may be translated, but not every tone in the voice that composed it. A temple may be traced, but not every private fear carried to its doorway. A king's inscription may boast of restoration, but not reveal the worker who set the brick in place while hungry, tired and thinking of home. You walk slowly through the ruin. The ground crunches softly underfoot. Bits of pottery catch the last light. In one place, the bricks are so eroded that they seem to be returning to the earth from which they were shaped. In another, a wall still stands stubbornly, its courses visible like lines of an old palm. You touch it gently. It is rough, warm, and fragile. This is the last lesson of clay. It remembers, but it does not promise. The Sumerian world, and the wider Mesopotamian traditions that carried its stories forward, gave humanity some of its earliest written windows into civilization, kingship, myth, ritual, and memory. Yet those windows are cracked, clouded, and set at strange angles. Through them, you see not a single clear answer, but a world deeply concerned with order and loss. A world where gods assign roles, cities rise under divine names, kingship descends and moves, floods divide ages, wisdom survives through sages, ritual repeats against decay, and signs must be read because direct voices have grown distant. If there is a final message left in such records, it is not a secret that defeats history. It is a quiet pressure inside history. You feel it as you pass a collapsed doorway and look into a room that once held someone's ordinary life. There may have been jars along the wall, a mat on the floor, a small lamp, a child asleep in the corner. Perhaps the person who lived here knew the names of gods, brought offerings during festivals, feared illness, complained about heat, and worried about grain. Perhaps they never heard the word Anunnaki spoken in the way later ages would imagine it. Perhaps their world was less mysterious to them than it is to you. That thought keeps the story honest. The mystery must not erase the people. The ancient records were made by human hands, even when they spoke of divine powers. Human hands shaped the clay, wrote the signs, carried the offerings, rebuilt the temples, copied the myths, buried the dead, and began again after disaster. Any message attributed to the great powers must pass through that human reality, or it becomes too weightless to matter. Some have wondered whether the Anunnaki represent a memory of beings who once stood near the beginning of civilization and then withdrew. Mainstream scholarship reads them within Mesopotamian religion, mythology, divine hierarchy, and textual tradition. Between those two ways of looking lies a twilight space where story can breathe. As long as it does not pretend to be proof, in that space you may ask what ancient people feared, hoped, remembered, and encoded in sacred language when ordinary explanation was not enough. You climb a low mound as the evening deepens. From here, the ruined city appears less like a place and more like a shape in the earth. The walls are not tall enough to command attention, but they remain. The temple area is a rise, the streets are faint lines, the whole city seems to be sinking and emerging at the same time, as if the land cannot decide whether to reveal it or take it back. Above you, the first star appears. It is small at first, nearly swallowed by the last light. But then the sky darkens and the star grows sharper. Soon there will be more. The same sky that watched the builders now watches the ruins. The same cycles continue over a world that has changed languages, gods, empires, maps, and names. This continuity is comforting only if you do not think about it too long. The stars remain, but cities do not. The rivers continue, but not always in the same beds. Clay tablets survive, but not the full voices that made them. Human beings inherit, misunderstand, repair, and forget. Perhaps the final message is simply this: nothing human is permanent unless it is cared for, and even care cannot make it eternal. Yet there is tenderness in that, not only warning, because if nothing is permanent, then preservation becomes an act of love. A scribe copying an old story matters, a worker repairing a wall matters, a priest repeating a ritual matters, a mother teaching a child a name matters, an archaeologist brushing dust from a tablet matters. A listener in the dark giving attention to a lost world matters too. The ruins do not ask you to believe too much. They ask you to listen carefully. They ask you to respect fragments. They ask you to leave room for uncertainty. They ask you to notice how often civilization depends on invisible labour, repeated care, and inherited memory. You sit on a fallen brick as night settles over the plain. The air cools, the wind softens. The city, if it can still be called a city, seems to exhale. There is no final revelation. No hidden door opens beneath the sand. No voice from the Anunnaki speaks in a language that ends debate. Instead, there is the quiet of what remains. Broken clay, distant stars, a river beyond sight, a question old enough to feel almost like sleep. Maybe the message was never meant to be solved. Maybe it was meant to be carried, changed slightly by every generation that touched it. Maybe the final instruction was not to know everything, but to remember that the world is older, stranger, and more fragile than any single age believes. And as the last light leaves the ruins, you understand that the story has not ended. It has only returned to the sand, where tablets still wait in darkness, where unread names rest beneath dust, and where the beginning of history may still be hiding behind the first page that survived. Word count 1198. Now let the image fade. The city becomes softer, the walls lose their edges, the broken tablets return to the earth that held them. The temple roofline lowers into shadow, and the river, unseen beyond the plain, keeps moving without asking to be understood. You do not need to follow every question now. You do not need to decide whether the final message was warning, memory, ritual, myth, or only the human need to give shape to time. Let it remain unfinished. Let the fragments rest where they are. Let the ancient scribes close their tired eyes. Let the canal workers lay down their baskets. Let the kings step out of their inscriptions. Let the gods withdraw into the calm distance of stars. Somewhere a lamp is being covered. Somewhere a reed stylus is set beside a tablet that will dry in the dark. Somewhere a child falls asleep under a roof of reeds, while outside the night gathers over clay walls and quiet water. And far away from that lost city, you're here, breathing slowly, listening from your own time, carrying only a small piece of the old question with you. That is enough. The sand does not need you to solve it tonight. The stars do not need an answer. The tablets can wait. Let the old world sink gently back beneath the sleeping earth. Let the dust settle. Let the river move. Let the unanswered message become only a soft shape at the edge of a dream. Ancient, unfinished, and calm. End of script. Good night.